Whole Story Quest Audiobooks presents The Scole Confession by Jacqueline Beard. Narrated by Andrew Cullum. Prologue. Scole, January 1892. Repent, therefore, and turn again, that your sins may be blotted out. Acts chapter 2, verse 19. My fingers tremble as I raise the hand mirror and regard my features through faded eyes. A murderess, clad in the guise of a harmless middle-aged woman, returns my gaze. She has one foot on the path to old age, but will never arrive. Death is close behind her and catching up fast. She and I were once the same, selfish, greedy and without compassion. But I have changed. We are different people now. A fleeting moment of regret made its home in my heart and nested there, bringing with it a conscience that crept like a vine, infiltrating my memories, nagging and whining like a spoiled child. It thrived on sickness, revelled in infirmity, and grew like the disease that ravages my body. I'm not yet 50, but my face bears the marks of old age and a life poorly lived. My hair, once a lustrous brown, is grey and patchy. Heavy bags nestle beneath my sunken eyes, and wrinkles furrow my face. I try to smile, but my mouth lingers in a permanent scowl, as well it might. My worthless life is coming to a lonely end. I blink as a sharp pain sears into my eyeball and peer into the mirror to locate the source of my discomfort. The pain is from a loose eyelash, which I brush from my eye with a gnarled finger. Then I lower the mirror, and it falls onto the bed. The looking-glass is brass, with a tiny bevel, the only nod to luxury. It is not elaborate, but I appreciate it, knowing that not every woman can afford a hand mirror. It was a treat to myself with the money I received when Fanny died. It must be 15 years ago now, but I remember as if it were yesterday. I shake my head to dislodge the memories, but they will not leave. I find myself wishing that the disease had taken hold of my sanity, as it did with Mrs. Peters, who lives in the room below. Her mind went long ago, and now she croons to herself with a vapid smile on her face as she rocks the day away, staring from the window without a care in the world. Her life is easy and pointless. But unlike me, she was always a harmless old bird. In the end, the good Lord gives us the end we deserve. He came into my life 3 or 4 years ago. The good Lord, that is. I hadn't known I needed him, hadn't reached the depths of despair that followed later. Hope still glimmered, if not burned. But back then I thought nothing of death and was quite content to profit by doing nothing. I did not consider my silence unreasonable, but self-awareness wasn't far behind. The Lord entered my life one warm August evening. I'd been walking down Mount Street towards the marketplace on my way to perform a chore. I can't remember what it was. As I passed the King's Head Hotel, I noticed there were boards propped up against a brick wall on the opposite side of the road. The printed boards announced an address by an American evangelist. He was due to speak at 7:30, and a small crowd had gathered to watch. I hastened along with no intention of listening, but entirely by chance I found myself returning down Mount Street at 7:45. The evangelist was in full flow, and the crowd had increased in size. They gazed at him with rapt attention. I found myself stopping, and without giving it any further thought, I settled on a step and began to listen. I continued watching, fascinated by his words, and he held my full concentration. The preacher was not American at all, but spoke with a distinct East Anglian twang. He could almost be a native of Dis, though his deep voice bore traces of another accent, and some of the words he used sounded foreign. Not American, though. Somewhere more exotic. The evangelist was tall, with high cheekbones and a full head of white hair. He wore a grizzled, untrimmed beard that reached the top button of his threadbare waistcoat, and he spoke confidently. Impassioned, honeyed words dripped from his mouth, leaving me spellbound. I hardly noticed the minutes pass by, and he finished in no time. One by one the crowd departed until I was the only one left, still sitting on the step and with no inclination to move. He approached me and held out a weather-beaten hand. His leathery skin was the colour of burnt wood and smooth to the touch. He smiled as he pulled me to my feet and asked me what was wrong. I remember wondering what he saw in me that made him ask. "I have sinned," I whispered as a torrent of feelings I had never acknowledged raced to escape. He didn't ask questions or attempt to pry, but with a notable lack of curiosity said, "Shall we pray?" And I nodded. We knelt together on the dirty pavement, and he spoke to God with fervour and faith. When he finished, he smiled at me, and I brushed my skirts and stood before him. But our reverent silence was disturbed by a rattle of stones, and I glanced across the street. 2 boys, the Scott twins, were standing there, pointing with percipient smirks on their faces. They were laughing at me, and my face reddened as I considered their interpretation of my actions. There was I, older than 40 summers, kneeling on a dirty pavement with a stranger. I had made myself a figure of ridicule. And it was at that moment that I realized what I had always known. All the secrets I had kept and the lies I had told would never bring love or happiness or peace. My loyalty was misplaced. The preacher watched as I wiped a tear away. Then he turned and reached into a cardboard box tucked behind one of the boards and took out a Bible. He wrote in the front, then handed it to me. Clasping my hands around the holy book, he quoted, "The love that lasts longest is the love that is never returned." He watched me through weary, knowing eyes, and I recognized a kindred spirit. I stammered my gratitude and left for my home in Scole, barely remembering the journey back. The same night, I placed the Bible in a drawer where it remained for many months. But from that day, my conscience grew increasingly troubled. Time spent alone gave me opportunities to contemplate the unrequited love that had justified my silence. And as my health failed, and the object of my passion remained indifferent to my suffering, I burned with shame for the part I had played. I reach for the hand mirror again and hold it to my chest. I cannot bear to see my reflection a second time. But the weight of the cold metal gives a strange, familiar comfort. Dr. Brown says that it won't be long now. My time is approaching, and my strength fails. I touch the brass to my lips and think of the man whose face I loved, and the crimes I concealed on his behalf, though he never loved me. I should tell Sergeant Hannant, and let him know what has lain undiscovered for so long. But old habits die hard. I cannot betray my love, though I can, and must, salve my conscience before I die. The mirror slips onto the floor and I leave it there, reaching instead for the Bible on my bedside table. I pick up the stubby pencil lying beside it lick the point and write on a flimsy blank page at the end of the book. It takes an hour to get the words down. An hour of concentration and despair, but I finish it while I still can. The words are clumsy, untidy, but written from the heart. They form my confession, though I doubt anyone will ever read it. At least I can go to God with peace in my heart. I tear the page from the Bible and it rips with an untidy, jagged edge. Then I fold it twice and roll it until it curls. It fits easily into the spine of the Bible, and I push until it is out of sight before using my last reserves of strength to place the book back on the table. I wonder if it is enough to save my soul, but it is all I have left in me. I sink back into my bed covers and wait. Chapter 1. An Overstrand Holiday. Overstrand, April 22nd, 1895. "Well, that's awkward," said Lawrence. "You might have told me." Francis Farrow put down his knife and fork and dropped a napkin onto his empty breakfast plate. Lawrence winced as a fishbone drifted onto the white table linen and wondered how long it would take before he felt compelled to move it. "I don't see what the problem is," Francis replied. "Have you quarrelled with Myers?" Lawrence sighed as he remembered the last time he saw Frederick Myers, a man he distrusted and feared, a man who had tried to kill him and afterwards had the nerve to ask for his discretion to cover a terrible crime. Lawrence had acquiesced, not from fear, but compassion, and because telling the story would benefit no one. It had been easy to conclude that the truth was not only unnecessary, but vastly overrated, which was all well and good, but it meant that only Violet and Michael ever knew the full story. Violet, never comfortable with concealing information, refused to discuss it at all. Michael, being a clergyman, was bound by the restrictions of his profession. So, although Francis was a close friend, Lawrence hadn't told him about the events in London that resulted in his incapacitation for the best part of 2 years. Had he done so, he might not now be sitting in the breakfast room of a man who turned out to be an intimate friend of Frederick Myers, and more, if certain rumours were true. "Not a quarrel exactly," said Lawrence, moving his hand towards the plate. He picked up the fishbone and deposited it in a cup while making a split-second decision to lie. "Myers and I had some business dealings which didn't work out. I doubt he's mentioned that to Cyril," said Francis. "They will have far more important matters to discuss." "Perhaps," said Lawrence, distracted by the fishbone floating in the coffee grounds at the bottom of the cup. He stood and walked to the window where he placed his hands on the sill and leaned towards the garden. "They all know each other, though, don't they?" "Who?" "Our host, Cyril Flower, Lord Battersea, as he is now known. He was a friend of Edmund Gurney, too." "Ah, the chap who died in Brighton, I see. Didn't he form part of one of your investigations, something suspicious, if I remember rightly? I hope you don't think Cyril was involved." "Not at all. Cyril dined with Gurney the night before he died, but there is no question of any wrongdoing. He is a good man as far as I know." "A decent man," said Francis. "An alumnus of Trinity College. That's where we met." "So I gathered. It's good of Lord Battersea to extend the invitation to the four of us. I only wish he wasn't so well acquainted with Myers." "That's the sort of generous fellow he is," said Francis Farrow. "As soon as I told him why I had declined his invitation, he said I must bring you all, if that's what it took to get me here. A fine fellow." "And when do we get to meet him?" asked Lawrence, turning from the window. He scowled at the coffee cup and dropped a napkin over it. The fishbone was finally satisfactorily hidden from view. "At dinner tonight. The Batterseas are in Norwich today. Constance has a long-standing engagement at the prison." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "Sounds serious?" "Not at all. Lady Battersea is an advocate for women prisoners' rights and is seeing the Board of Governors to campaign for better conditions in jail. Lawrence grimaced and wondered how wise it had been to accept the hospitality of a Liberal politician. While far from sympathizing with the hang-em-and-flog-em brigade, he had seen enough appalling crimes committed by both sexes to be unconcerned about the conditions in which they found themselves incarcerated. Talking of Lady Battersea, the door opened before Francis could finish, and a young housemaid appeared carrying a large silver tray. "Excuse me, sirs," she said, bobbing a curtsy. She placed the tray on the sideboard and began to clear the table. "Oh, dear." Lawrence watched as she knocked the coffee cup that he had hidden from sight under the napkin. A line of coffee grounds seeped into the white linen tablecloth and dripped onto the carpet. Lawrence bit his lip. "Sorry," he mouthed. "I'll fetch a damp cloth," said the housemaid. "What were you going to say about Lady Battersea?" asked Lawrence once the maid had left the room. "Ah, yes. I didn't mention this before because I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. After all, Cyril is much more down to earth. He knows men from all walks of life, and status is less important to him." Lawrence turned around. "Why do I get the feeling that I'm not going to like what you are trying to tell me?" Francis walked towards the mirror opposite the sideboard and straightened his tie. "Lady Battersea comes from a prestigious family. She was a Rothschild before she married." "Not the daughter of Sir Anthony, the merchant banker?" "Yes." "I didn't know." "No reason why you should, old man. The point is that although she is passionately concerned for the welfare of the poor and needy, her natural companions are among the aristocracy. Lord and Lady Battersea entertain all manner of people, from statesmen to royalty." Francis turned to face Lawrence before continuing. "As you know, I am acquainted with Cyril from Trinity College. My father is a knighted High Court judge, God rest his soul, so Michael and I have the right background." His voice trailed away. "I may not have advanced to your level in the police force," said Lawrence, pursing his lips, "but my family have money and connections." "You are not the problem," said Francis, looking at his feet. "I see. You are referring to Violet, aren't you?" "She was a governess, Lawrence. She is from a different class." "She is more of a lady than many I have known from the upper classes, and if it is such a problem, why did you invite us?" "Please don't take offense. I have nothing but admiration for Violet. She is a friend and is welcome in my house at any time. The invitation was extended to both of you because I chose to honor our existing arrangements. I wanted to enjoy some time together, which is why Lord Battersea insisted that you come too. It's because I don't want Violet to feel embarrassed that I told Cyril that she was the daughter of a Scottish baronet. Please tell me you didn't. Violet hates deceit of any kind." "Well, she is in the wrong job then. Isn't that how you find things out?" "Of course, Violet understands that it is necessary from a business point of view, but expects absolute honesty outside of that." "I'm afraid she will need to treat this visit as if she was undercover. It will be easier for us all." Lawrence shook his head. "I wish you hadn't misled Lord Battersea, Francis. Violet won't believe I didn't know." Francis Farrow sighed. "It is done now. You had better find her and tell her the plan." "Isn't this splendid, Cyril?" Lady Constance Battersea beamed as she surveyed the dining-room table, which was, as usual, beautifully laid out. Taking pride of place in the centre was a whole salmon arranged upon a silver salver and surrounded by slices of cucumber. Caviar topped each slice, and the addition of giant king prawns and dressed crabs made a mouth-watering presentation. "Yes, my dear. Cook has excelled herself. Please, sit down." Cyril Flower gestured to his guests. Lawrence Harpham took Violet's arm and guided her to a chair. When she was comfortably seated, he took his place beside her. "Thank you," she said, biting her lip. He patted her hand. "My pleasure." "Well," said Lord Battersea, "it's good to see you at last, Francis. It's been far too long. What kept you away from us?" "The Masonic Lodge takes up most of my time these days," said Francis, "and I am on the board of the Guardians for the Mill Lane Workhouse, of course." "Very commendable," said Lady Battersea, nodding approvingly. "We also take a keen interest in the welfare of the needy. Cyril was in the village last week helping out with the Riseborough boy. So very sad."
"What was wrong with the poor lad?" asked Michael, ducking out of the way of the footman who was trying to fill his tumbler with water. "He is dying from consumption." Lord Battersea shook his head sadly. "I delivered a box of food to his family. They are poor and in great want, but it is not enough to save him. A sad situation. His mother is widowed, and he is the eldest son and provides for the family." Michael bowed his head. "God bless him," he said. Violet reached to her right and squeezed his hand. "Your gardens are magnificent," said Francis, trying to alleviate the gloom that had settled upon the room. He scooped the contents of one of the crab shells onto his dinner plate and ate it with relish. Delicious. "Overstrand crabs are the sweetest in the country," agreed Lady Battersea. "These are fresh from the sea today. As for the gardens, the credit is due entirely to Cyril. They are far from finished, but I love the view of the poppy garden from the veranda." "You love it now, my dear. It wasn't always so."
"But you've made so many improvements since we first came to Norfolk. That awful draughty cottage. I was never so cold in all my life. And now we are about to join the two villas into one grand house."
"Really? Well, that sounds like a lot of work," said Francis. "And it will take a long time to finish," Lord Battersea replied. "But I have employed the services of Edwin Lutyens. His architectural plans are almost ready. It will be a grand residence when it is complete."
"And you can entertain as many people as you wish," said Constance, "which will make you very happy, I am sure. Now, tell me about yourself, Miss Smith. I understand you hail from Scotland." Violet lowered her fork. "There isn't much to tell," she said softly. Lawrence watched her with concern. It was unlike Violet to be quiet. She had barely spoken during the meal and was showing signs of nervousness in the presence of Lord and Lady Battersea. Lawrence worried that the ordeal of masquerading as someone else had quelled her natural enthusiasm for being in company. Knowing Violet, she would feel like the worst kind of imposter. Under normal circumstances, Violet fitted into any social situation. Tonight, she should have shone, dressed in a royal blue dress with a delicate neckline and looking every inch a lady. Violet Smith was no beauty. The kindest description would cast her as homely, but being in her late 40s suited her. Clear, unlined skin and delicate laughter lines enhanced her features. She had recently lost weight, but not too much. Her cheekbones now appeared sharper and her jawline firmer. Lawrence realized that he had been staring and took a sip from his tumbler of water, wondering why the wine hadn't arrived yet. "How do you know, dear Francis?" asked Lady Constance, trying to put Violet at ease. "Oh, we met in Bury St. Edmunds. The dining-room door opened, and the butler appeared.
"Excuse me, your lordship, Lady Battersea. Mr. Morley has arrived."
"Do show him in," said Lady Constance. John Morley followed behind the butler. Cyril Flower stood, and Francis followed his lead.
"No, please sit," said Morley. "Carry on eating. It looks splendid."
"We have saved you a seat," smiled Lady Battersea.
Morley pulled out a chair at the foot of the table and sat down. "Please forgive me. I was delayed in London unexpectedly." "Don't give it another thought," said Lord Battersea. "Francis, this is my good friend and colleague, John Morley. John, meet Francis and Michael Farrow, Mr. Harpham, and Miss Smith." "Pleased to meet you," said Morley, nodding his head. He sat down and helped himself to a plate of food while the footman poured water into his glass. "How are matters in Ireland?" asked Lady Battersea. "Complicated," replied Morley, "and not helped by the interminable disagreements within our party." "Lord Rosebery again?" asked Lady Battersea. Lawrence loaded his plate with another slice of salmon while Morley nodded in agreement. He wasn't especially hungry, but Lawrence had no interest in politics, and it created a distraction to disguise his evident apathy. "We'll talk about it later," said Cyril. "The internecine disputes within the Liberal Party are not an aid to a convivial conversation. How are you finding retirement, Francis?" Very agreeable. I don't know how I found time to work." Francis continued to regale them with stories of his last year as a senior ranking officer in the Suffolk Constabulary. Meanwhile, footmen cleared the salvers away and replaced them with an array of mouth-watering desserts. "And I still see my old colleagues at the Masonic Lodge, of course," Francis continued, "and last week brought a nice surprise. The Social Design Lodge invited me to join as an honorary member. They want me to assist in the organization of a banquet in honor of the first Suffolk Grand Master." "Can you be in 2 lodges at once?" asked Michael. "I won't be. The honorary position is for the Odd Fellows, not the Freemasons. They are a friendly society composed, in the main, of town tradesmen." "I'm sure you will be able to offer valuable advice," said Lady Battersea, eating a spoonful of cherries and cream. "I hope so," said Francis. "Representatives will be arriving from Liverpool and Manchester next week. The planning has to be meticulous for an event of this magnitude." "Ah, Liverpool. I wish you were going there rather than them coming to you," said Lawrence. "I've promised to visit Uncle Frederick next week and would have enjoyed some company on the train. And your brougham is very comfortable for travelling to the station." "I will be leaving Norfolk in 2 days," said John Morley, "and going straight to Liverpool. If you decide to visit early for any reason, it is only a short journey to Cromer railway station. We could travel together." "My uncle is expecting me next week," said Lawrence. "He is a creature of habit and not given to changes of plan, but thank you anyway." "I understand. Let me know if you change your mind." "Would you like to join me in the music room?" Lady Battersea finished her dessert and dropped her napkin on the table. "I will, thank you," said Violet, looking anxious. "Are you quite well, Miss Smith?" "I am well," she replied. "Just a little tired." "Then you must retire to your room and rest. I will find something else with which to occupy myself while the men talk. Thank you, your ladyship. You are very kind." She waited for Lady Battersea to leave the room, then followed behind. Lawrence flashed her a smile as she rose, but she did not catch his eye and left the room with her head bowed. As soon as the ladies had departed, Cyril Flower got to his feet. "Gentlemen," he said, gesturing towards the door. Lawrence discovered why there had been no wine at dinner as soon as they retired to the smoking room. Lord and Lady Battersea were enthusiastic members of the Temperance Society and enforced the prohibition of alcohol after one of their staff committed an unmentionable act while under the influence. Though Lord Battersea alluded to it, the exact nature of the misdemeanour remained a mystery. Lawrence probed him on the matter, but Cyril was tight-lipped. John Morley was evidently in the know, but loyally tried to explain the move to temperance in political terms. The Liberal Party encouraged abstinence, and its many members now embraced it. Nevertheless, once in the safety of the smoking room, Cyril produced a decanter of whisky and offered it to his guests. Lawrence and Francis both accepted a glass while the others declined. The ensuing conversation was informative and free-flowing, despite the lack of alcohol for one half of the party. But after an hour, Lord Battersea suggested that they regroup on the veranda. By then, Lawrence had consumed his 3rd glass of whisky. One look at Cyril's anxious face, and he concluded that Lady Battersea was unaware of the alcohol concealed in her husband's private room. It was clear that he was hastening a rapid departure before they drank enough to give the game away. The tactic was well judged. Lady Constance had not retired, and was sitting on the veranda gazing into the distance with a contented smile on her face. It was approaching 9:30, yet the evening temperature was still warm. Lady Battersea greeted them cordially and beckoned them to join her in the well-furnished outdoor space. After a few moments of small talk, Morley asked Lord Battersea to join him in a stroll around the garden. They meandered past the poppy beds and were soon out of sight. "I expect they have party business to attend to," said Lady Battersea, by way of explanation. "Now," she said, turning to Lawrence, "what is wrong with your companion?" "Nothing that I know of," Lawrence replied. "The journey might have overtired her." "Yes, that is very likely. It is a pity that Miss Smith retired early. Now I must make conversation with 3 old bachelors," she continued,
What a shame that you have all missed out on the pleasures of married life. My dear Cyril is the most beautiful of men and such an amiable companion. I cannot imagine life without him."
"I'm not sure Michael qualifies as old," said Francis, "and Lawrence is not a bachelor."
Lady Battersea raised an eyebrow. "I am sorry I did not realize that you were married," she said. "Francis failed to mention Mrs. Harpham."
Lawrence drew a deep breath, unsure of how to reply without causing embarrassment, but Francis seized the initiative. "Lawrence is a widower," he said.
"I am sorry,"
replied Lady Constance. Lawrence sighed. "Please don't apologize. You were not to know." Francis diverted the conversation towards the arts and found himself arguing with Michael about the relative virtues of Byron and the American poet Emily Dickinson. Lady Constance had been fidgeting throughout their conversation. With the brothers fully occupied in their debate, she turned to Lawrence again. "I have loved Cyril since the day I first set eyes upon him," she said, "and I know the pain of loss when I see it. I am sorry that I upset you." Lawrence leaned back in his chair and observed his hostess. Her eyes shone with genuine concern. Talking about Catherine was never easy, but it was unavoidable without appearing rude. "You are not the cause of any distress," he said, "but Catherine died on May Day, and it is rapidly approaching. It will be the 8th anniversary of my wife's death, and also that of my daughter."
"You lost a child." Lady Battersea's eyes widened, and she leaned forward. "I am so very sorry for you. What a tragedy."
"They died in a fire," said Lawrence, offering the information before she asked. "Catherine, my wife, and Lily. She was only 4 years old. A beautiful little thing." His voice trailed away and he swallowed a lump. The pain of their loss had abated during the last few years, yet here tonight it was raw again. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Lady Constance touched his hand. "In difficult times, we turn to our friends," she said. "It is so important to have loyal and compassionate companions." She smiled towards Michael and Francis. Lawrence nodded. "I have known them most of my life," he said. "They are excellent men. Violet has also been a great comfort, although I have not known her nearly so long, but her kindness is inestimable." Lady Battersea arched a brow, and Lawrence wondered whether she had misinterpreted his meaning, but there was no time to correct her, as Francis had given up trying to persuade Michael about the superiority of Lord Byron's poetry. "What's that about Violet?" he asked. "Mr. Harpham has been telling me about her many virtues," said Lady Battersea. "Mr. Morley and my husband have finished, it would seem. Hello, my dear," she said, rising to greet Lord Battersea, who had emerged from behind the shrubbery. "Come inside, it's getting cold," said Cyril, ushering them back into the house. But Lawrence remained seated, in no mood for company. He stared into the darkness of the garden, brooding as he listened to the churning swell of the North Sea. It had been many years since the thought of Catherine had wrenched at his heart as it had tonight. Though he would always love her, he had become accustomed to her absence. His work as a private investigator had given his life meaning again, and because he was rarely alone, he seldom grew introspective and moody. Violet's influence had saved him from the worst of himself. Violet. She would know what to say to make the pain go away. Though words were not what he needed, being in her presence was enough, and would take the edge off his misery. Damn Lady Battersea for all her kindness. Without her interference tonight, the anniversary of Catherine's death might have passed without notice. Now he was as afflicted by the yearly dread of May Day as he had ever been. He looked at his pocket watch. It was 11:15. Violet's room was down the corridor from his own, and he must walk past it to get to bed. Lawrence entered the double doors in the dining room and slipped into the entrance hall, bypassing the drawing room where his dinner companions were still talking.
He climbed the stairs, then navigated to the west wing landing. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on Violet's door. Chapter 2. A Tragedy. April 23rd, 1895. Lawrence woke to the shriek of gulls. Cold air enveloped him as he pushed back the bedspread and rubbed his eyes. The wind must have unhooked the latched window in the night, and it was now splayed open and showing signs of damage. He pulled on his dressing gown and slammed it shut, watching the trees tremble and bend in the blustery wind. Lawrence perched on the side of the bed and poured himself a glass of water, then contemplated the previous night. His despair at the memories of Catherine had lifted, as he knew they would once he was in Violet's presence. She had a calming effect, and dark thoughts never intruded when she was near. But he shouldn't have gone to her, shouldn't have compromised her position, and now, today, he had a new set of problems. He decided to walk off his worries before breakfast. The weather was unusually cold for April and dry, but with squally winds. A solitary walk on the Overstrand cliffs with the sea breeze whipping at his face would make him feel alert and alive. He would know what to do by the time he returned. Lawrence dressed and descended the grand staircase into the spacious entrance hall. He removed his coat and hat from the stand by the door and made for the side entrance. A murmur of voices alerted his attention to someone in the morning room, and he craned his neck to see who it was. Violet and Francis Farrow were exchanging pleasantries across the table. "You're up early," he said, popping his head through the door. Violet was stirring a cup of tea pensively. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Nor I," said Francis. "I must have eaten something that interfered with my digestion. Damned dyspepsia. I didn't catch a wink last night." "I'm going to take a stroll," said Lawrence. "Would either of you care to join me?" Violet looked up and nodded. "I'll get my coat." "I'll walk part of the way with you," said Francis, wincing as he stood. "I don't think I can manage much of a distance, though." When they were suitably attired, they strolled through the water gardens and into Gunton Terrace. A right turn at the bottom took them to the promenade where steep stone steps descended to the beach. The tide was out, and rock pools draped in seaweed covered the sand flats. They walked across the beach, barely speaking, while gusty winds whipped past their ears, ruling out any attempt at small talk. It was just as well. Both Lawrence and Violet were deep in thought, and Francis was grimacing in pain. At the end of the promenade, they climbed a further set of steps, reaching the cliff top without uttering a word. "That's enough for me, old man," Francis yelled against the wind as soon as they reached the coast road. "Are you coming back now?" Lawrence shook his head. "No, I want to walk a little longer." Francis raised his hand as they parted, and he set off towards the centre of the village. Lawrence and Violet continued in silence until they reached the Mundsley Road. Then Violet stopped and took a deep breath. "Are we going to talk about it?" she asked. "Violet, I'm sorry, Whatever Lawrence was sorry about remained unspoken. As he was talking, a man dressed in a white shirt and dusty work apron tore up the road towards them. "Help me!" he cried. "What is it, man?" asked Lawrence. "What on earth is the matter?" The man stopped, caught his breath, and put his hands over his face. "I think he's dead, God help him," he said. "Give me a hand cutting him down." "Who?" asked Lawrence. But the man was already racing back the way he had come. "Hurry!" he called over his shoulder. Lawrence and Violet exchanged glances, then ran after him, catching him up in a large yard about 50 feet away. "In there," he spluttered, pointing to a large shed. "I'll go first," said Lawrence, stepping inside. As Lawrence's eyes grew accustomed to the dark shed, a shape hanging from the rafter in the middle of the room swam into view. It was the body of a man with his head tipped forward, and snow-white hair covered his eyes. The early morning sun had dappled his dark apparel as it filtered through holes in the dilapidated shed. Stack after stack of neatly piled bricks surrounded the corpse, each one standing over 6 foot high. Closer to the body lay a set of smaller piles.
Each block was staggered and fashioned into a rudimentary staircase giving access to the rafters. "Don't come in," said Lawrence gruffly, but it was too late. Violet was beside him, staring at the hanging man in horror. "Help me cut him down," said Lawrence, bounding up the brick staircase. He reached the top and touched the man's neck. "He's still warm," he yelled. "Get me a blade." The man in the work apron fumbled in his pocket, then pulled out a wooden-handled pocket knife. He held it towards Lawrence, who began hacking at the rope. After a few strokes, the frayed rope split and the body fell, crashing to the ground. Violet ran towards the man and cradled his head. His face was deathly pale beneath greying stubble, and small patches of blood had formed on his lips and eyelids. She gripped his wrists and felt for a pulse. "Well?" asked Lawrence. Violet shook her head. "He is beyond our help." The man who had raised the alarm let out a strangled cry. "Do you know him?" asked Violet. "He's my father-in-law," said the man. "His name is Edward Bowden." "I'm sorry," said Lawrence. "I wish we could have saved him. Can you fetch a doctor, Mr. Cotton? George Cotton?" said the man, who was now sitting on a packing crate, looking shocked and pale. "I don't know, They were interrupted by the arrival of another man. "Oh, no," he said, clutching his chest. "Poor old boy. Have you told Mr. Riches?" George Cotton shook his head. "I've not long found him." "Then I'll fetch him," said the young man, rushing away. "Get the doctor, too," shouted Lawrence. George Cotton scrambled to his feet, still pallid. "Wait for me," he said, stumbling from the shed. "How are you feeling, Violet?" asked Lawrence, squatting on his haunches beside her. She was still holding the dead man's head. Her voice trembled. "He looks peaceful," she said, "but I can't bear to think of anyone feeling so unhappy that this is their only option." She touched the rope still tied around his neck. "Should I undo it?" Lawrence shook his head. "No. Wait until the doctor arrives. Look, old girl," he continued, touching her arm. "You can't stay like this. Put him down." "I can't leave him on the cold floor," she said. "You must," said Lawrence firmly. He stood up and walked towards the door where he had seen a burlap sack earlier. Lawrence returned to Violet, moved Edward Bowden's head away from her lap and placed it gently on the sacking. "There is nothing more you can do," he said before holding out his hand. Violet grasped it, and he helped her to her feet. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to a second packing crate by the right of the brick staircase. Lawrence approached it to find a threadbare handkerchief, a few coins, and a Bible. "They must belong to him," said Lawrence. "He placed them there before—" Lawrence could not finish, and stared mutely at Violet. She bit her lip. Poor, poor man. Without thinking, Lawrence picked up the Bible and opened the cover. "Another Edward," he said. "It's stamped inside. Edward Moyes. The English and Foreign Bible Stall, Man Island. Funny. That name seems familiar." "What are you talking about?" "The inscription in the Bible. There's a verse inside and the bookseller has signed it. He's from Man Island. I know that name, but I can't remember where it is." Violet half listened as she watched over the dead man, still reluctant to leave him. "That's it!" exclaimed Lawrence, clicking his fingers. "I jolly well ought to know. Man Island is in Liverpool. It's not far from my uncle. Are you listening, Violet?" "Yes," she snapped. "What does it matter? A man is lying dead and all you can think about is the provenance of his Bible. Why are you so interested? And who is this other Edward?" "Who indeed?" said Lawrence. He paced for a few moments, then returned to the packing crate and opened the Bible again. "I knew it!" he cried. "I must be getting old, Violet. Of course the name is familiar. It's been all over the newspapers." "What has?" "The murder of Edward Moyes earlier this year in Liverpool." "It can't be that Edward Moyes." "It must be. Moyes was a bookseller in Man Island." Lawrence clutched his forehead. "Honestly, Violet, I'm losing my faculties." Two men rushed into the shed before Violet had time to respond. "George Riches," said the shorter man, reaching out his hand. "I own the brickyard. Mr. Bowden was one of my men. This gentleman is the coroner. I am Lawrence Harpham, and this is Violet. We are very sorry for your loss." The coroner knelt and inspected the body. "I can confirm that life is extinct. He's probably been dead for a few hours. Did you find him?" "No, it was George Cotton, his son-in-law." "Thank you. There's nothing else you can do," said the coroner. "Leave us to it." Lawrence nodded and guided Violet towards the door, passing by the packing crate. He waited until both men were facing the body, then discreetly lifted the Bible and placed it in his breast pocket. Chapter 3. The Bible. "If you'd told me it would be this damp, I would have changed my shoes," said Violet, struggling to keep up with Lawrence's rangy pace. "Sorry, you should have said. I'll slow down so you can avoid the wet grass," Lawrence replied. "What's the rush, anyway?" "There isn't one. I'd just rather be doing something than nothing." Violet sighed. They had returned to the Battersea residence straight after their unfortunate encounter with what remained of Edward Bowden. By the time they reached the villa, Lady Battersea had left for an engagement at the Belfry School, while Lord Battersea and the Farrow brothers had gone for a round of golf at the Cromer golf course. "He made a quick recovery," said Lawrence after the housemaid informed him that Francis was much improved. "There's not much that Dr. Morse's compound syrup doesn't fix," she'd replied. "Now, can I offer you tea or coffee?" Lawrence declined, opting to meet the men at the golf course instead. "It's not far," he'd told Violet, and they set off at a brisk pace down Paul's Lane. They considered walking past the ruined church and along the main Cromer Road, but settled for a walk across the cliffs. The grass was still damp from the early morning dew. As Violet's shoes grew wetter, she became more irritable and struggled to disguise it. Lawrence was eager to discuss the Bible that they had found near the hanging body, but Violet was reluctant. She always found death unsettling, but this time was worse than usual. Lawrence became increasingly concerned over her mood as it veered between sadness and anger. The longer they walked, the more distressed Violet became. Eventually she turned to Lawrence and asked him to make a solemn promise never to suffer in silence if he was feeling low. Understanding at once that her fears came from witnessing the suicide, he reached for her hand and brushed it against his lips. "You know I always seek you out if I'm worried," he said. "Like I did last night." She smiled, expecting him to drop her hand, but he did not. They were still walking hand in hand when they approached the Royal Cromer Golf Club. "Look," said Violet, pointing to a group of men in the distance. "There they are," said Lawrence. "Michael is wearing his dog collar." Lawrence raised a hand as they approached, while Lord Battersea stepped forward and removed a golfing iron from his bag. Lawrence placed his finger to his lips and whispered, "Wait." They stood in silence until Battersea had taken his shot, which whistled down the course and onto the dogleg. "Well done," said his partner approvingly. "Hello. Good to see you've caught us up," said Francis Farrow, patting Lawrence on the back. "Who is Lord Battersea playing with?" asked Lawrence. "None other than the great Willie Aviston," said Francis. "Is that supposed to mean something?" "Not to a Philistine like you with no love for the noble game. He is a professional golfer and very well regarded," said Francis. Lawrence shrugged. "Shall we go, then?" asked Michael, watching Lord Battersea and Willie Aviston walking down the course to take their next shots. Lawrence put his hand out. "It feels like rain," he said. "Nonsense," said Francis Farrow, but within moments the heavens opened. "They're not going to stay out in this?" asked Michael, striding towards the clubhouse. "I expect so," replied Francis. "Anyway, it will soon be over." They settled inside, watching from the window. Michael and Violet cupped mugs of tea while Lawrence and Francis nursed brandies. "Where did you two go after I left you this morning?" asked Francis. Lawrence and Violet exchanged glances. "You tell him," said Lawrence as Violet recounted their experience. "But that's not all," said Lawrence, interrupting her as she described the mean little pile of coins and the handkerchief on the packing crate. He left a Bible from a bookstall run by none other than Edward Moyes. "The murder victim?" asked Michael. "The very same." "Dashed odd," said Francis. "Still, there's a Bible seller in every town." "Fascinating, don't you think?" asked Lawrence. Francis grunted. "I've still got the Bible," said Lawrence. "I suppose I ought to take it back. I had better find out where the family live." "Who are they?" asked Michael. Lawrence screwed up his eyes in concentration. "The dead man is called Bowden, and his son-in-law is George Cotton." "Gunton Terrace, then," said Michael. "How the devil do you know that?" "Lady Battersea and I spoke at length about their charitable work yesterday," he replied. "Lord Battersea was unduly modest when he mentioned the Riceborough boy at dinner. He often takes gifts of fruit and food items to the poor and sick. The eldest Cotton lad broke his leg last year and was unable to walk for several months. Lord Battersea visited the family on several occasions." "Where is Gunton Terrace?" "Close to the villa, opposite the water gardens." "Excellent. We'll go now. You coming, Violet?" Violet sighed as she looked at her wet shoes before pushing her half-finished mug of tea away. "Yes, for all the good it will do," she muttered beneath her breath. Number 4 Gunton Terrace was a red brick house in a terrace of similar properties. Located opposite the flint wall surrounding the Battersea residence, it was a tidy property. Cheerful curtains adorned the front windows, and a pretty window box full of daffodils complemented the brickwork. Lawrence knocked on the door to be met by a slender young woman dressed head to toe in black. Her eyes were swollen and red-rimmed, and a young child squirmed in her arms. "What do you want?" she asked defensively. Lawrence hesitated. "We would like to give our condolences." Violet stepped in before Lawrence said something insensitive. "We found Mr. Bowden in the shed this morning." The woman's features softened. "My husband said there were other people there," she replied. "Thank you for trying to help him." "Who is it, Amelia?" A quavering voice emanated from the back room of the property. "Visitors, mother. They have come to pay their respects. Show them through." Lawrence and Violet stepped into the hallway and through a door to the front parlour immediately on their right. Inside were 6 wooden chairs arranged around a fireplace above which hung a large oil painting of a fishing boat. Heavy net curtains blocked the light, bringing a sombre quality to the room. "Take a seat," said the young woman, releasing the wriggling child from her arms. She left the room, and the child stood in the doorway watching them balefully. Violet reached her hand towards the little girl, but she shrank away, then toddled down the hallway towards her mother. They sat in silence for a few moments until Amelia Cotton returned, accompanied by a stout, grey-haired woman, also dressed in black. "This is my mother," she said. Lawrence stood and bowed his head. "I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. I wish it were under happier circumstances." "Thank you," she replied, offering her hand. "Do take a seat." Lawrence perched on the chair, wondering how to proceed, but Jane Bowden spoke again. "Amelia said that you tried to help my husband." "We attempted to, but he was beyond our aid." "I did not hear him leave the house this morning," she said, pausing as she tried to control the tremor in her voice. "I have been unwell, and he let me lie abed. Had I risen with him, he might not have—" Her voice broke and a single tear slid down her soft cheek. Amelia Cotton knelt beside her mother and held her hand. "Please don't blame yourself," she whispered. "Father has not been right for a while." "Did he ail?" asked Violet. "Not physically. My father was sick in his head," Amelia replied. "Edward's spirits never recovered after he lost the foreman's job," said Jane Bowden. "He did not lose it," Amelia corrected her mother. "Times were hard, and there was not enough work for everyone. My father was a good man, unassuming and loyal, and couldn't bear to let his men down, but there was no choice. Circumstances forced him to let some of them go, men with families and mouths to feed. He never forgave himself and never recovered his spirits. He couldn't work for a long time, but Mr. Riches was kind to him,
more than most employers would be. He talked to my father and they came to an arrangement. Mr. Riches would replace him with a younger man who would become the new foreman, and father could stay on at the yard. A lesser man than Mr. Riches would not have cared, and we might have starved.
"I've only met him once, but he struck me as a decent chap," said Lawrence.
"The very best," agreed Jane Bowden, dabbing her cheeks with a black lace handkerchief. "How will you manage now?" asked Violet. "We are lucky. Edward was a member of the Odd Fellows. They will provide for us."
"Odd Fellows? A friendly society, I believe," said Lawrence.
"Yes, a burial club. Edward paid 2pence a week to the Loyal Albion Lodge in Cromer. They helped us when he couldn't work a few years ago, and they will pay out now that he has died."
Mrs. Bowden put her head in her hands and sobbed silently. Lawrence rubbed his chin, feeling uncomfortable at her distress, then remembered his reason for being there. "This belonged to your husband, I believe," he said, producing the Bible. He passed it to the grieving widow. She smiled through her tears.
"Yes, this belongs to Edward. This little book was one of his few pleasures in the end."
"I noticed the mark on the front," said Lawrence. "The Bible came from Liverpool."
"It was a gift from his friends in the lodge," said Jane Bowden.
She opened the book and pointed to an inscription. Lawrence read it aloud. "Do not call to mind the former things, or ponder things of the past." Isaiah 43, verse 18. Was that a favourite Bible verse?
"No,"
said Mrs. Bowden.
"but some of the Norfolk Oddfellows arranged a fraternity visit to Liverpool at the end of last year. It was a big event with many lodges taking part. Edward was too unwell to go and was very disappointed. His friends in the Loyal Albion visited the Albert Docks and passed a Bible stall on Man Island. The English and foreign Bible stall, I think. Anyway, John Dennis and a few of the other men saw the inscription in the Bible, thought of Edward and his troubles, and purchased it for him. It was a source of great comfort, and I am grateful for its return."
Lawrence smiled weakly. His conscience was beginning to get the better of him at her gratitude for returning something he shouldn't have taken in the first place.
"We should leave now," said Violet. "We have taken up enough of your time."
Mrs. Bowden smiled graciously, and Amelia showed them to the door. "Our condolences once again," said Lawrence, tipping his hat as they left.
Violet chatted as they walked the short distance to the Battersea residence, but Lawrence was monosyllabic. "What are you thinking?" she asked while they walked up the driveway.
"Odd business, this Liverpool killing," he said.
"Not really. Hasn't the murderer been caught?"
"Well, yes."
"Then it's all over, bar the hanging."
Lawrence, I know that look.
"There is nothing about this crime that requires our attention."
"I know," he said. "I know."
He retired to his room and settled on the end of the bed, deep in thought, watching the gulls circle round the cliff. He was still watching them 2 hours later.
Chapter 4. Last dinner at the cottage. "I jolly nearly thrashed him," said Lord Battersea, carving a slice of beef from the magnificent joint, taking pride of place on the dinner table. "A spot of bad luck at the last hole put the kibosh on it, but it was a close-run thing." "Well done, Cyril, old chap," said Francis, tucking into his evening meal with relish, the earlier attack of dyspepsia a distant memory. "It was good practice ahead of my game with Lord Suffield at the weekend." "Does Suffield play well?" asked John Morley. "He's won the majority of our games so far, but he won't win this one," said Lord Battersea, nodding his head confidently. Lady Battersea smiled at her husband. "Have you recovered from your ordeal this morning?" she asked, turning to Violet, who cocked her head solicitously. "Yes, thank you," Violet replied. "And you called upon Mrs. Bowden?" "We did. She was very distressed, as I'm sure you can imagine. It had only been a few hours since her husband passed away." "I will drop in on the family tomorrow," said Lady Battersea. "It is the least I can do. Dear mother instilled in us a great sense of duty.
There is much pleasure to be had from helping others to lead full and happy lives.
Michael smiled. I am sure they will appreciate your attention, he said. I fear I may have a visit of my own to make when I reach my parish tomorrow.
Really?
Lady Battersea looked at Michael with concern. Yes, Suzanne Hardy, the coachman's wife. She's been suffering from tuberculosis and can hardly rise from her bed. I happened upon her husband in our little church the day before I left. The poor chap was knelt on the floor and praying to God with such concentration that he did not hear me enter. I placed my hand on his shoulder, and he started in shock, so I joined him, and we prayed together, and asked that God might spare her. I can only hope that he answers our prayers, but I fear she was too far gone to hold out much hope.
Life is but fleeting,
murmured Lady Battersea. Lord Battersea smiled at his wife. Let us speak of happier things, my dear, he said. Like your golf game? Laughed Francis. I could talk about that all night, but my head will grow big, said Lord Battersea. I say, Harpham, did you get to the post office in time?
Post office?
Echoed Violet. Lawrence coughed. Yes, I did, he replied, turning away from Violet's gaze. Ah, so you are going to join me tomorrow? Asked Morley. Yes, if it is still convenient. Thank you again for your kind offer.
What offer?
Violet did not attempt to conceal her suspicions. Mr. Harpham has agreed to join me on my trip to Liverpool, and Lord Battersea has kindly arranged a carriage to the station.
You are going to Liverpool tomorrow? Asked Violet angrily.
Yes. I sent a telegraph to Uncle Frederick this afternoon, and he replied just before dinner. Fortunately, he has no other engagements, and it suits him to see me this week instead of next. Violet did not answer. She stopped eating, put her cutlery down, and glared at him with ill-disguised annoyance. Francis and Michael will accompany you to Bury St. Edmunds. It will be no different from our original plan, except that there will be 3 travelling instead of 4.
How long will you be?
Violet watched him through reproachful eyes, her anger already turning to disappointment. A few days at most, said Lawrence. I will catch a train at the end of the week. Violet opened her mouth to ask how she was supposed to manage their office alone again, then thought the better of it, remembering that she was acting as the daughter of a Scottish baronet during this visit. She recovered herself and politely asked Lady Battersea about her earlier visit to the Belfry School. Lawrence let out a deep breath. He had escaped Violet's wrath for now, but would no doubt have to face the consequences in the not-too-distant future. Chapter 5. Man Island, April 24th, 1895. Lawrence and John Morley parted ways by the Albert Docks. Morley was due to resume his post in Ireland the following day and had taken rooms at his usual hotel. Lawrence had declined the offer of a drink on the pretext of going straight to his uncle's house in Derby Square. He would go there eventually, but not before he visited the bookseller's stall in Man Island. The murder of Edward Moyes fascinated Lawrence for reasons that he didn't fully understand. Ordinarily, he would not have rushed to Liverpool at the risk of upsetting Violet. She had taken the dominant role in the business part of their occupation since Lawrence's injury, and after being incapacitated for the best part of 2 years, Lawrence had stopped acting on impulse and did not take unnecessary risks. He was calmer and more measured in his approach towards investigations. Violet had been right, and the business had recently become profitable due to her more cautionary nature. Lawrence no longer dreaded paying the rent, and keeping on the right side of Violet was a price he was happy to pay. But, he told himself, he was only bringing a planned visit forward by a week because the transport arrangements were better, and he might as well visit the scene of the murder while staying in Liverpool. After all, he was a private investigator, and it was perfectly reasonable to take an interest. Lawrence alighted from the railway carriage to heavy rain which continued for half an hour before petering into a drizzle. He walked along the greying pavement, not bothering to open his umbrella. The dockyard buildings brought a pang of familiarity as he thought of happy childhood visits. Lawrence inhaled a lungful of salty sea air and gazed towards the sea. Sleek-backed gulls swooped low across the sky, buffeted by sea winds. The younger birds, now independent of their mothers, picked at the detritus on the pavements. Circling above, the adult gulls shrieked and mewled their disapproval. Lawrence closed his eyes and tried to visualize the last time he had been in Liverpool. Aunt Clara had still been alive, and Catherine was with them, so it must have been a short time after they married. Had it really been that long since he had visited Uncle Fred? He felt a momentary pang of guilt, quickly forgotten as he approached a pavement opposite a terrace of red brick houses. His attention had wandered to a row of stalls where street vendors were trading their wares. Lawrence hadn't known where to find the Bible seller, but his knowledge of Liverpool was good, and he'd thought he could still remember where to find the Man Island stalls. Sure enough, he located the bookseller's stand close to the Liverpool landing stage. Behind it was a young boy with deep brown eyes and skin the colour of polished ebony. He smiled as Lawrence drew close. "Can I help you, sir?" His voice was deep and resonant with an unfamiliar but pleasing accent. "Do you sell Bibles?" "Uh-huh." "That's a good start, but I'm looking for a particular stall." Lawrence retrieved a notebook from his coat pocket and scanned the pages, the British and Foreign Bible Society stand, to be precise. "This is it," said the young man, gesturing to a poster immediately behind him. "Ah, yes," said Lawrence, relieved. "Do you usually look after the stall?" "I only been on it about half an hour," smiled the young man. "I've been keeping watch for Mr. Patterson while he's gone on an errand." "When will he be back?" The boy shrugged. "An hour, maybe 2. "Thank you." Lawrence reached for a red leather Bible and opened the cover. The bookseller's mark, familiar from the Bowden Bible, was on the flyleaf, stamped but without an inscription. "Did you know Mr. Edward Moyes?" asked Lawrence. "I knew him by sight," said the boy. "I never spoke to him, and now I never will." "But Mr. Patterson knew Moyes." "Might have. I don't know. Mr. Patterson knew the murderer, though, and that's for sure." "How do you know?" "Because he told me. William Miller was the man's name. I only met Miller once, but he called me names and kicked me out of the way. Mr. Patterson took over the stall after Moyes died. When it got busy, he'd asked me to look after it while he did other things. One day he picked up a newspaper and said he was surprised about Miller's arrest, as he never knew him to be violent. I told him that the man was guilty for sure. He kicked me when all he had to do was ask me to move." "Do you think he killed Moyes?" asked Lawrence. "Everyone thinks so," said the boy, nodding his head. "He was not a nice man." "Well, thank you for your time," said Lawrence, smiling. "I'll be on my way now. You don't want to buy a Bible?" Lawrence shook his head and retraced his steps, walking the pavements until he reached Derby Square. From there, it was only moments to his uncle's house in Lord Street. He knocked on Uncle Fred's front door, and without waiting for a reply, he stepped inside. "Lawrence, how lovely to see you!" Uncle Fred shuffled down the stairs as Lawrence stepped into the hallway. They shook hands warmly. "Did you have a good journey?" "I did," said Lawrence. "Thank you for accommodating the new date of my visit." "It was no trouble," said the old man, gripping a wooden stick which he'd propped up against the stairpost. He gestured ahead to a door on the right. Lawrence obliged and entered the drawing-room where a large photograph of his Aunt Clara took pride of place above the marble fire surround. Lawrence smiled at her likeness in fond remembrance. The rest of the room was largely unchanged since his last visit and evoked an unexpected nostalgia. "Sit down," said his uncle. Lawrence waited for Frederick Harpham to settle. The older man limped towards a wing-backed armchair and carefully lowered himself onto the seat. "Gout," said Uncle Fred by way of explanation before Lawrence had the opportunity to ask. "How are you keeping, Uncle?" "Tolerably well for a weak and feeble pensioner." "And Harriet?" Lawrence had not seen his cousin for at least a decade. "She is back," his uncle beamed. "She has had enough of Devon and will not return." "Excellent," said Lawrence. "My father sends his regards," he continued disingenuously. His father would have extended his regards had he known Lawrence would be in Liverpool a week earlier than planned.
"Good. And how is Lionel?"
"Very well, and often calls in on Uncle Max."
"Ah. Is Max still spending every waking hour whittling wood?"
"Probably more than is good for him, so Aunt Myrtle says." They carried on chatting about family until Uncle Frederick took out a pocket watch and checked the time.
"What about a spot of tea?"
he asked. "That would be nice." His uncle lifted a bell tucked away to the side of his chair and rang it vigorously. Moments later, a woman in her 60s, attired in a pinafore dress and white apron, appeared in the doorway.
"Connie, my dear, would you fetch some tea and cake?"
"Yes, Frederick," she smiled.
Uncle Frederick leaned forward.
"This is Connie, my housekeeper,"
he said, smiling at the woman. "Pleased to meet you." Lawrence nodded his head, wondering if he ought to stand and offer his hand. He wouldn't ordinarily shake hands with a domestic, but the relationship between his uncle and the housekeeper seemed oddly informal. Connie left the room before he could decide, and the two men continued talking. Before long, she reappeared with a wooden tray containing a teapot, cups, and a china plate piled high with gingerbread.
"I made it myself,"
she said proudly.
"Capital!"
beamed his uncle, stretching forward to take a piece.
Delicious,"
he continued as crumbs spilt down his waistcoat.
"You have excelled yourself."
Connie's face turned pink, and she left the room beaming. "A good cook," said Lawrence, eating his cake. It was palatable, but no more than that. Still, it wouldn't harm to flatter the housekeeper, as it seemed to matter to his uncle.
"She's a treasure," said Uncle Frederick. "I do not know what I would do without her."
"Has she been with you long?"
"About a year,"
he said.
"I grew tired of managing my domestic affairs after Clara died, and it was lonely with Harriet away. Connie is both housekeeper and companion."
Lawrence nodded, understanding all too well the absence of a loved one. His reaction had been different from his uncle's when he became a widower, and he had chosen a more solitary path. Lawrence had attended to his chores alone, feeding himself only when strictly necessary. It was different now, of course, with time having passed and the torrent of grief trickling to only brief moments of pain. Lawrence would not wish any hurt upon Uncle Fred, and what harm could it do if his housekeeper was something more? Good for him. "I was in Man Island earlier," he said, changing the subject.
"Whatever were you doing there? There isn't much to see."
"Revisiting childhood haunts," said Lawrence.
"Oh, of course,"
chuckled his uncle. "And I happened upon a Bible stall."
"Oh?"
"Edward Moyes used to own it."
"Moyes, you say?
Wasn't he the chap that got himself killed?" "Yes, he was."
"Rum affair,"
continued Frederick Hopham.
"They've caught him, you know."
"The murderer?"
"Yes. William Miller."
"Guilty as charged?"
"No doubt whatsoever, though he continues to deny it. Too many witnesses, though. He will hang."
"Was it a robbery?"
"Well, it seems that way, though according to the newspapers he left a purse of money in the house."
Lawrence leaned forward. "Is that what you meant when you said a rum affair?"
"Partly,"
said his uncle. Lawrence waited for Frederick to continue, but he looked fixedly towards the window and stayed silent. "Did you know him?"
"Who?"
"Moyes."
"No, not at all."
"Was the murder discussed at your club?"
"Not really. When it first happened, it was all anyone spoke of course, but not for long. Why don't you go and see young Strettle if you want to know more? He was at the heart of it."
"Tom Strettle? Is he still in the police force?"
"Yes, why shouldn't he be?"
"We worked together about 8 years ago," said Lawrence. "A case of fraud crossing several counties. He didn't come out of it well, as I recollect, and I haven't seen him since. I could try, I suppose."
"I thought you wanted a break from investigating," said Frederick.
"This is a break," Lawrence smiled. And if you have the time to spare, you can show me the sights. But I might see Tom while I'm here too, for interest's sake. You don't mind, do you?" "Not at all." His uncle helped himself to another slice of ginger cake. "I am getting old, Lawrence, and spend too much time in this chair asleep, much more than I care to mention. You must come and go as you please. Then I'll drop in on Tom tomorrow." Lawrence sipped his tea and watched as, true to his word, Uncle Frederick drifted off to sleep. A rum affair, his uncle had said without expounding on what he meant. The more Lawrence considered it, the more he felt that his uncle had skillfully evaded a pertinent question. Any murder was unnatural by definition. But there was something nebulous lurking in the background of this one, something his uncle hadn't felt able to say. The hairs on the back of Lawrence's neck prickled in anticipation. Something was wrong with the Moyes murder, and Violet wasn't here to stop him looking into it. Tomorrow he would investigate as if the case was officially his. Chapter 6. Red Cross Street. April 25th, 1895. "Detective Strattler's outside," said the young police constable. The sallow-faced policeman was sitting at the front desk with his feet on a stool, wearing rolled-up sleeves. A half-eaten sandwich lay in full sight. Lawrence regarded him with disappointment. Standards in the police force had dropped over the last few years. "Where exactly?" asked Lawrence. "In the yard, round the back." "Don't get up, I'll find him myself," said Lawrence sarcastically as the constable continued to stare vacuously at the facing wall. Lawrence walked towards the rear of the police station, manoeuvring past a row of cycles propped up against the dirty exterior of the building. He noticed Tom Strettle immediately. Strettle had hardly changed and was aging well, with barely a wrinkle and only a smattering of grey at the temples. He stood in front of an odd-looking vehicle with his arms crossed. Lawrence walked towards him and held out a hand. Tom Strettle looked up with a puzzled expression that gradually altered as recognition dawned. "I know you, don't I?" he said with a hint of an accent. "Lawrence Harpham, former Suffolk Constabulary. We worked on the Croxteth case." Strettle's face darkened. "I remember," he said. "What do you want?" Lawrence rubbed his left palm as he considered his response. It was a habit he had almost lost since discarding his trademark leather gloves the previous year. His brush with death in '91 had encouraged him to scrutinize the less-than-perfect parts of his life. His obsession with concealing the scars on his damaged left hand suddenly seemed like an unwarranted indulgence. He'd elected to discard the gloves, along with some other bad habits, feeling an immediate relief, akin to shedding an uncomfortable skin. "I want to ask you something, but first tell me about this carriage. I've never seen anything quite like it." Lawrence gestured towards the contraption in the middle of the yard. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" said Tom Strettle, smoothing his hand across the polished wooden carcass. "Yes," agreed Lawrence tactfully, though not dissimilar to a large perambulator. Strettle scowled. "It's a horseless carriage," he hissed. 3 horsepower with a tube ignition. "Is it yours?" "No. It's a prototype belonging to a friend of mine. He was going to test her up a hill." "Then what is it doing here?" "Waiting for a mechanic," said Strettle. "Ah, it's broken then." "Never you mind." "What do you want?" "You remember my uncle?" "Vaguely." "I'm staying with him. He happened to mention the murder case you are working on." "Did he?" Strettle raised an eyebrow. "Well, yes, and as I'm in the area and Uncle is otherwise occupied, I decided to come and ask you about it." "Why would I want to discuss my cases with you? The last time I made that mistake, I got a dressing down, and you got a commendation. Well, that was hardly my fault. It certainly wasn't mine," said Strettle bitterly, flushing a deep red. "I'm sorry," said Lawrence. "I can't rewrite history, and anyway, they wouldn't listen to me. I did try." Strettle pursed his lips.
The Moyes case is cut and dried anyway, he conceded. We captured his killer within a week of the murder, and the boy Needham has made an identification. There was a witness. Yes. Who was also a victim. That animal Miller damn near killed the boy in Redcross Street. God alone knows how he survived so many blows from a poker. Lawrence grimaced. I hear it was theft. Strettle didn't answer. Was anything taken? I've got nothing else to say, Harpham. The case hasn't even gone to trial yet. If you want to know more, you can read about it in the newspapers. Just one more thing? What? Strettle glared as he spat the word out. Uncle Fred said there was something rum about the case. I wondered what he meant. Strettle laughed. Yes. There's something rum, all right. More about the man than the murder. He turned away from Lawrence and stalked off towards the front of the police station. Moments later, Lawrence could still hear him chuckling. Thomas Strettle was a good detective. The Croxteth fraud case might have damaged the professional relationship between Lawrence and the Lancashire policeman, not that it was ever close, but Lawrence still admired Strettle's tenacity and drive. Though unlucky on that one occasion 8 years ago, Strettle had enjoyed an otherwise impressive career. But if Lawrence could think of one flaw in the man, it was that he never knew when to stop talking. Like a few moments ago when Strettle had inadvertently given Lawrence the address of the crime scene in Redcross Street. And Lawrence knew exactly how to find it. He traversed the streets in the direction of Man Island, striding confidently towards familiar haunts. And before long he arrived on the corner of Redcross Street, a mean little terrace of buildings that had seen better days. Lawrence walked up and down the road, trying to find any obvious clues that might lead him to the correct property. Nothing stood out, so he doubled back to a barber shop that he had passed at number 26 Redcross Street. Lawrence peered through the curved, multi-paned window to see if anyone was inside. The windows were in dire need of a clean, but he could make out a slight movement. He pushed the door, and it opened to the clang of a bell. The barber was midway through a wet shave when Lawrence stepped inside. He grimaced at the disturbance, narrowly avoiding nicking his customer's ear as the jangle of the bell disrupted his concentration. "Sit down," he said, pointing to a row of wooden chairs peppered with woodworm. "I'll be with you shortly." Lawrence perched on the sturdiest chair and examined the room, which was small, untidy, and liberally coated with dust. He rubbed an imaginary stain from his jacket and watched the barber drip foam onto the floor. Lawrence considered the wisdom of using a cutthroat razor in such insalubrious surroundings. He waited as the barber continued his work, using the blade with great dexterity. When he had finished, the barber suggested a trim, which the man duly accepted. A clock ticked loudly in the background, and Lawrence watched while the barber worked in silence. After a few moments, the occupant of the chair rose, reached into his pocket, and grunted a thank you as he paid. "What can I do for you, sir?" The barber sighed as if he was about to perform an arduous chore. "A shave, please," said Lawrence. He didn't particularly need one, but finding a customer in the shop had put him off course. He no longer felt able to ask what he wanted without availing himself of the services. He positioned himself in the chair and waited while the barber sharpened his razor from a long strop that dangled from the wall. "You from around here?" asked the barber, lathering soap onto Lawrence's face. "No, I'm visiting." "Thought I didn't recognize the accent." "I'm staying with my uncle." "Very nice, I'm sure." "He said there had been a death in Redcross Street." "There was. Right above this shop," said the barber, puffing out his chest, as if proud of the connection. "Here?" Lawrence could not hide his surprise. He had unknowingly stumbled on the crime scene. "Did you know him?" "Of course. The dead man rented out the upstairs rooms, and now my landlord needs to find a new lodger. Not easy with old Moyes' effects still lying around." "Has nobody been to collect his possessions?" "His nephew came and said he would pack them up and take them away this weekend, but he didn't show up." "I may be looking for rooms." "I thought you said you were staying with your uncle." "Temporarily,"
said Lawrence, as the barber dried his newly shaved face with a brown-stained towel. The bell jangled again, and an elderly man hobbled into the room and heaved himself onto a chair.
"Morning, Charlie."
"I'll be right with you." "Can I see them?" asked Lawrence. "See what?" "The rooms. I need to know if they are large enough." The barber looked at him. "You serious about renting a room?" "Very," said Lawrence, handing the man a few coins. "Here." The barber reached inside an earthenware jar on the counter near the door and pulled out a set of keys. "Go through the yard and up the passage. The door is on your right." Lawrence took the keys and made his way outside, while the barber started work on his next customer. The heavy wooden door led into a narrow hallway with a door off to the side. Lawrence opened it to find a small parlour with a sofa and 2 wooden chairs. A coal scuttle lay on its side by the fireplace, and a pair of fire tongs hung from one side of a poker set, the other side unbalanced and empty. A flight of steps rose from the end of the hallway, finishing in a scullery situated above stairs. The planks groaned under Lawrence's weight as he tiptoed upstairs, trying not to look at the brown stains smudged along the bottom of the wall. A wooden table, chairs, and a stove dominated the dimly lit scullery, and a film of dust lay across the table upon which 2 blackened pans rested, still containing the remnants of Moise's final meal. Lawrence passed through the room and into an inner hallway leading off to 2 bedrooms. A set of wooden steps lay directly beneath an open loft hatch. Lawrence climbed the steps and peered inside. It was pitch black. So he retreated and reached for a small tin that he habitually carried containing firelighting material. Lawrence retrieved a match and lit the stump of a candle. Holding it aloft, he examined the space. Bloody handprints surrounded the interior of the loft hatch, and dust had been disturbed. It appeared as if someone had been feeling around inside. The tiny light was too dim to see much further, so he climbed down and opened the smaller of the 2 doors. The room was in disarray, coated with dried blood and buzzing with flies. Lawrence held his hand over his mouth, trying to keep the contents of his stomach in place. Someone had made a token effort to tidy the contents of the room with no thought given to the filthy floor, which had lain uncleaned and bloody since the slaying. Lawrence wondered whether the barber's landlord knew how unsanitary the conditions were. The bigger room was in better shape, with a stripped-down bed and floorboards bearing evidence of a cursory clean. At one end of the room, an empty wardrobe hung open, and at the other, boxes of possessions stood haphazardly by the side of a large trunk. Lawrence picked his way across the room, approached the trunk, and heaved it open. Inside were stacks of books, on top of which was a bundle of letters affixed with Antipodean postage stamps. Lawrence removed a thick piece of paper and read a paragraph from one of the missives. "I joined Brother Maguire at Table Cape, and we had glorious meetings in the church. In 6 weeks nearly 60 souls were brought before Christ," he read. Lawrence flicked through the remaining letters, all written in a similar vein. "Must have been an evangelist," he muttered beneath his breath. He placed the letters to one side and removed a handful of books. There were vast numbers of prayer books, Bibles, and other religious texts, most likely intended for the Bible stall. Lawrence was about to replace them when he noticed 2 small journals which he picked up and opened. The first was an address book written in the same neat hand. The majority of the addresses were from settlements in Australia and New Zealand. He placed it back in the trunk and opened the second journal, which, on closer inspection, proved to be a diary. It was a dull journal containing details of appointments and a smattering of Bible verses. There were occasional entries journaling Moise's thoughts about the day or future pursuits. He had recorded 1 or 2 meetings, and there was a reminder to buy lamp oil. But Lawrence was drawn to an intriguing entry in January. It read, "Has Jackson replied, re the Scole confession. Ask about Fanny Nunn." Lawrence walked to the bedstead and sat down, reading and rereading the entry. Who were Jackson and Fanny Nunn? What was the Scole confession? Could it be the title of a novel? Surely not. As Lawrence mulled it over, he remembered the address book and recovered it again from the trunk. He flicked to the letter N, reading entries for Newman, Naylor, and New Zealand. Hobart. Brethren. But there was no sign of Fanny Nunn. He licked his thumb and turned the pages back again until he reached the letter J. There, written in tidy italics, was an address. Mr. William and Mrs. Amelia Jackson, Scole Street, Thorpe Parva, Scole, Norfolk. That was Lawrence's home territory. Scole was only 20 miles or so from his office in Bury St. Edmunds, and if memory served him well, Michael's new parish in the tiny hamlet of Friends was close to Scole. He could ask the Jacksons about Edward Moyes, and while he was about it, inquire after Fanny Nunn. He scribbled the Scole address in his notebook, closed the trunk, and left the room. Lawrence returned to the barber's shop and found Charlie talking earnestly. The conversation was one-sided, with the barber struggling to get a word in. It suited Lawrence's circumstances. With the men distracted, he deposited the key on the counter and mouthed a "thank you," quickly exiting without having to explain himself. It was a short walk to his uncle's home in Lord Street, but Lawrence used every second to contemplate the diary entry. The murderer of Edward Moyes was, without doubt, William Miller. There was no logical reason for him to get involved, and Violet would not approve at all. Yet every instinct Lawrence possessed was on alert, triggered by the innocuous diary entry. One way or another, he needed to find out what had happened in Scole. Chapter 7. Lord Street. "Hello, young Lawrence!" Uncle Frederick beamed as Lawrence opened the drawing-room door. "You are just in time for a sherry." Uncle Frederick was sitting in his customary chair with a silver salver containing a decanter and glasses by his side. "I don't mind if I do," said Lawrence, perching on the arm of a nearby chair. He waited for his uncle to finish pouring, then reached for the sherry glass, crossed the room and relaxed into the comfortable sofa. "I'm glad to be back," he said. "You'll never guess where I was this afternoon." "Involving yourself in a case that doesn't concern you, I should think," said his uncle, raising an eyebrow. "How well you know me," said Lawrence dryly. "Still, it's been interesting." "In what way?" "The crime scene, for one thing," said Lawrence. "Ah, so Tom Strettle was happy to accept your help. Good of him to let you in. Tom Strettle doesn't know. He hasn't forgiven me for the last time we worked together." "I see. So, how did you get inside? I presume that's what you mean." "A little subterfuge," said Lawrence. "It doesn't matter. It was pretty revolting in the property. It's been several months since the murder, and the place is still covered in blood." Frederick Harpham pulled a face. "They have had more than enough time to clean up." "Yes, anyway. The downstairs was in disarray, but some of Moyes's possessions were stacked upstairs. He kept a diary, and there was something odd about one of January's entries." Uncle Frederick sipped his sherry and licked his lips. "What was wrong with it?" "Something about a Scole confession. Does that mean anything to you?" "No, not a thing." "Scole is a village in Norfolk." "So it is. Near Diss, if I remember." "Is that all you know about Scole?" Frederick nodded. "Have you ever heard of Fanny Nunn?" Uncle Frederick stroked his chin. "I don't think so. Did she come from Scole?" "I've no idea," said Lawrence. "She may not even be a real person. I thought you might remember something from your time in Suffolk." "That was nearly 40 years ago now," said his uncle. "The name is vaguely familiar, but I'm blowed if I know why. Anyway, I can't see how it makes a difference." "Neither can I," Lawrence admitted. "But it feels like it should." He took a sip of sherry and continued. "My search of Red Cross Street was not a pleasant experience. There are bloody handprints all over the loft space, and it looks like someone made a thorough search, yet Miller left a purse of money behind. Perhaps he couldn't find it. Don't the papers make mention of it being under the mattress? Isn't that the first place he would have looked? If he was thinking rationally, but he had just killed a man, perhaps he panicked. There is no doubt that he was searching for something, said Lawrence. There's evidence all over the house. We will probably never know. I say, Lawrence, I forgot to tell you. A telegram arrived earlier. It's on the mantelpiece behind the clock. Frederick gestured towards the fireplace. I'm not expecting anything, said Lawrence, knocking back his sherry in one gulp. He set the glass down, reached for the telegram, and slit it open. It's from Violet. Chapter 8. A telegram arrives. Thursday, April 25th, 1895, 3:30 p.m. From Smith, Bury St Edmunds, to Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool. Hope all is well. Letter has arrived marked urgent for your attention. Love to Frederick, V. Thursday, April 25th, 1895, 4:45 p.m. From Harpham, Liverpool, to Smith, Buttermarket, Bury St Edmunds. Something odd about the Moyes murder. Go to Scole as soon as possible. Speak to William Jackson, Scole Street, Thorpe Parva. Ask about Edward Moyes and Scole confession. What letter? L.H. Friday, April 26, 1895, 9 a.m. From Smith, Bury St Edmunds, to Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool. Would ordinarily refuse, but Michael at Friends, and will join him for weekend, then speak to Jackson in Scole. Assume no hostility to questioning. Shall I open it? V. Friday, April 26, 1895, 10:08 a.m. From Harpham, Liverpool, to Smith, Buttermarket, Bury St Edmunds. Also, ask Jackson about Fanny Nunn. No hostility anticipated. Yes, open the letter. L.H. Friday, April 26, 1895, 10:52 a.m. From Smith, Bury St Edmunds, to Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool. Who is Fanny Nunn? The envelope contains a drawing of a family crest. No note. V. Friday, April 26, 1895, 11:17 a.m. From Harpham, Liverpool, to Smith, Buttermarket, Bury St Edmunds. Describe crest. L.H. Friday, April 26, 1895, 12:15 p.m. From Smith, Bury St Edmunds, to Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool. Silver with red stripe and Celtic crosses left to right, blue dolphins either side. Will leave for Scole this evening. V. Friday, April 26, 1895, 12:58 p.m. From Harpham, Liverpool, to Smith, Buttermarket, Bury St Edmunds. A cruel hoax. Catherine's family crest. Destroy. L.H. Chapter 9. Toxteth. Saturday, April 27th, 1895. Lawrence stared at the bowl of porridge, then stirred it for the fourth time. His appetite had deserted him since reading Violet's last telegram. But Uncle Frederick was insistent that he join him for breakfast, and the thought of eating anything more substantial made him feel ill. "Is there something wrong?" Uncle Frederick watched Lawrence anxiously. "You look tired, dear boy. Did you sleep well?" "Very," he lied. Lawrence had barely slept at all. His anxious mind would not settle while he pondered the identity of the person who had posted a copy of his dead wife's family coat of arms. And why? From the moment Violet mentioned a crest, he had known. A wave of foreboding had passed through him. Part of him wanted to know more, but mostly he dreaded finding out. Even so, he had hastened to the post office to ask Violet the question that would provoke the inevitable response. Catherine had been immensely proud of her heritage. The two dolphins neighant in her crest represented a fusion of her Blennerhassett Suffolk roots with those of Clan Kennedy in Scotland. The family had traced their lineage to the time of Richard II, documenting their genealogy and commissioning a crest. Catherine received an ornate carving of the heraldic shield on the occasion of her engagement, and it took pride of place over the mantelpiece in their dining room. Lawrence had seen it so often that he knew every detail of the crest. The fire that took Catherine's life also took the wooden coat of arms and most of his household furniture and possessions. It would have been a small price to pay had Catherine and Lily survived, but that night he lost everything he held dear. It was only now, almost 8 years later, that he was finally able to find peace again. Posting Catherine's crest was an act of utter spite, made worse by the cowardice of anonymity. Whoever sent it must have understood the consequences, showing a clear intention to drag up memories of the past with all the devastation that accompanied them. The chiming from a grandfather clock roused Lawrence from his thoughts. It ticked noisily beside the table, accentuating the silence between the two men. Lawrence fought for composure. Somehow, he had made an enemy. And that enemy knew precisely how to hurt him. Lawrence pushed the porridge away as another wave of nausea enveloped him. "I have a headache, Uncle," he said, preempting Frederick's inevitable concern. "I can't eat. I need to go out and walk it off." "Where are you going?" "I don't know. To do something useful, I suppose." "Connected with this murder?" "Perhaps." "You should lie down. You might be coming down with a cold. I'll ask Connie for a cough linctus." "Please don't trouble her. I don't have a cough." "Then don't spend too long outdoors. You'll catch something nasty and end up in the hospital." "That's a thought," said Lawrence. "I wonder if the Needham boy is still under medical care. Perhaps I'll visit him." "He's long gone," said Frederick. "The boy was discharged back in February, made a swift recovery by all accounts, and is now living with his sister." "I thought you said you didn't know anything about the murder." "I don't. Needham's sister, Mary Fagan, Charles for Cornelius Sullivan. He's a friend of mine, and we were speaking of it only recently." "Were you?" "Yes. I had intended to ask Mary to do a bit of cleaning a few times a week, but young Needham came home and was under her care, so she couldn't oblige." "Why do you need a cleaner when you have a housekeeper?" "Connie prefers to cook," said Uncle Fred. "She is not a char." Lawrence sighed, torn between loyalty to his uncle and fears about Connie. He was glad that Uncle Frederick had found a companion, but concerned that she was taking advantage of his good nature. "Where does Mary live?" he asked. "Close to the church on the edge of Toxteth, about a mile away." Lawrence placed his napkin on the table and stood. "Then that's where I'm going," he said. "It's raining, Lawrence. You'll get wet. The boy may not be there. You're not well, and it may be a wasted journey. You'd be better off in bed." "Don't worry, Uncle," said Lawrence, placing his hand reassuringly on the old man's shoulders. "It doesn't matter. It's the walk that I need." He collected his coat and an umbrella from the coat stand and walked into the drizzly street. Lawrence had never been to Toxteth and doubted that he would revisit. The walk along the Strand opposite the dock was, if not exactly pleasant, then at least familiar. But as he strolled past the warehouses and along Sefton Street, the buildings grew smaller and closer together. Many were in varying states of disrepair and some were empty. The terraces of houses crammed together added a claustrophobic tension to the swirl of emotions in Lawrence's chest. He half hoped that Mary Fagan wasn't at home. The thought of communicating with a stranger was far from desirable, but better, he supposed, than being alone with his thoughts. Lawrence approached the corner of Hill Street near to the Anchor Works. A group of navvies smoking coarse pipes clustered around a lamppost and glared suspiciously at Lawrence's neat attire as he attempted to pass. A thick-set man stepped forward and blocked his way. "What's a gentleman like you doing here?" he asked in a heavy Irish brogue. Lawrence ignored him, in no mood for a confrontation, while his mind still churned with thoughts of crests and Catherine. Then he reconsidered. Lawrence's geographical knowledge of Toxteth was limited. Uncle Fred's was better, but his directions to Mary Fagan's house amounted to somewhere near St. Thomas Church. Lawrence realized he would need help, and he might as well take the opportunity that had presented itself. "Do you know where Mary Fagan lives?" he asked. "Which Mary Fagan?" Lawrence shook his head. He had not anticipated there being more than one. "She has a brother, a young man called Needham." "That will be Flaming Paul," said a tall, dark-haired man, spitting a jet of chewing tobacco to his right. He approached Lawrence. "What do you want with her?" Traces of saliva clung to his swarthy face as he eyed Lawrence keenly. Lawrence recoiled at the smell of the man's hard labor as he intruded too close for comfort. He considered the safest response. "It's the boy I need to speak to," he said. "You had better not bring any trouble to his door," said the first man. "He's had enough of that." Lawrence nodded. "I know. There will be no trouble, I swear." "Henderson Street," said the dark-haired man, pointing ahead. "Number 37. Tell her Padraig sends his regards." "I will." Lawrence nodded his head as he crossed the road and made his way in the indicated direction. He arrived outside Mary's house, having found it by process of elimination. As many houses lacked door numbers as those that possessed them, and Lawrence narrowed it down to the most likely by guesswork alone. The front door was open, and a bucket and scrubbing brush lay beside the wet front doorstep. He raised his hand to tap on the door as a woman with copper-coloured hair appeared in the doorway. She was clad in a dark brown dress with fraying sleeves and clutched a squirming kitten in her hands, which she deposited by the doorstep. "Off with you now," she said as the kitten skittered across the road. "Yours?" asked Lawrence, trying to start a conversation. "Kate Harrington's, I shouldn't wonder. Her cat is always in the family way. I don't want the dirty thing in my house with George only recently recovered." "George Needham?" "Yes." "Why?" Mary's eyes narrowed. "I'm a detective. I want to speak to him, if I may." "You may not." Her mouth set in a thin line. "He has told you what happened over and over again. He has nothing more to say until it goes to court." "I won't trouble him long." "You won't trouble him at all. Now be off with you." Lawrence turned to go, then remembered the navvy. "Padraig sends his compliments," he said. A pink flush spread across her freckled face. "That man is wicked, so he is," she exclaimed, "and me a married woman." Then she softened. "Look, I'll ask George if he will speak to you, but if he says no, then let him be. He still gets upset whenever he talks about it." Lawrence nodded and loitered by the doorstep while Mary retreated inside. He was still waiting 5 minutes later when he felt a warm body press against his trouser leg and heard soft mewls and purrs. He looked down to see the little kitten rubbing herself against his ankles and knelt to tickle her furry ears. She returned his stare through round blue eyes set into a tabby face. Lawrence did not like cats as a rule, but this one was rather appealing. He rubbed it under the chin again, then flinched as a black object landed on the back of his hand. He moved to brush it away, but the creature leapt out of reach. Lawrence stood up and shooed the kitten away. The last thing he needed was an armful of flea bites to add to his other problems. "I told you it was dirty," said Mary Fagan, reappearing in the doorway. "This is George," she continued, ushering a scrawny, dark-haired boy forward. "He has agreed to speak to you. Do you want to come inside?" "No, sister," said George in a thin, reedy voice. "I'd rather walk." "This way," he said, pointing southwards down the terrace. They made their way to the end of the street in silence. Then George turned right onto Warwick Street and continued towards the docks. "I don't want to say anything else in front of Mary," said George. "She gets so upset, feels responsible somehow, I don't know why." "Maybe it's because she is a good deal older than you," offered Lawrence. "Perhaps," George agreed. "This way." He stopped in front of the Brunswick docks, and they walked across rows of cobbles, captivated by the crowded port. Ships, sailboats, and flat-bottomed barges jostled for space in the busy docks. Ahead of them, groups of men dressed in hard-wearing work attire hauled planks from freight vessels into a giant warehouse. 2 enormous cranes stood idly in the distance, their operators waiting for orders to continue the dock expansion work. The air was warm and salty, and the sea calm and blue. "Here," said George, gesturing to a quiet area on the dockside. He lowered himself onto the edge and leaned back, swinging his legs against the sea wall. Lawrence removed his jacket, placed it on the ground, and sat beside him. "Thank you for speaking to me."
"Are you a real copper?"
George came straight to the point. "I'm a detective," said Lawrence.
"But not from round here. You don't sound right."
"I'm not from here," Lawrence admitted. "I'm visiting my family." George seemed content with the inadequate explanation.
"Did you know him?"
he asked. "Who?"
"Old man Moyes."
"No."
"He was a good sort."
George picked up a stone and sent it skimming into the sea.
"Good and kind. He treated me well. He treated us all well."
"There were others?"
"Before me, yes. And sometimes Mr. Moyes needed more help when it was busy. He gave me food, shelter, and employment. He did not deserve it."
His voice trailed away, and he bowed his head. Lawrence waited for him to continue.
"I suppose you want to know what happened?"
Lawrence nodded.
"Is this part of the trial?"
"No. I visited 26 Red Cross Street yesterday. The house is still in disarray. I would like to know a little more about what happened that day, if you are up to telling me."
"Why?"
"I can't help feeling that there's more to the murder than money alone."
"I'll tell you what I know, as long as I don't have to go back there. I never want to see the place again."
George Needham shuddered. "Of course not," said Lawrence softly. "Tell me what you can remember." Needham stared at the sea for a long time, then swept back his hair with dirty fingers, exposing a vivid welt down the side of his neck.
"It was a normal evening," he said. "We must have returned about 5:30, 6 o'clock as usual. I began to prepare our evening meal, and Mr. Moyes went to Myrtle Street to pick up some books. He can't have been gone for more than 5 minutes when there was a knock at the door, and I saw a man standing there."
"Miller?" asked Lawrence. The boy nodded.
"Miller," he said. "I'd never seen him before, and I didn't much like what I saw. He had a queer twitch to his face whenever he spoke. The first time he came, he asked after Moyes, and I told him he wouldn't be back until later, and carried on making tea."
"And Miller returned?"
"Yes. The second time I could not put him off. He insisted on waiting while I carried on cooking. I set the old man's meal aside for later and ate mine at the table while Miller watched. And all the while I was eating, he kept asking where Moyes kept his money and valuables. He said it was wrong that I didn't know in case something happened."
"Like what?"
"He didn't say. Only that friends and family would never know where his things were."
"What things?"
"Money, mostly. But he kept asking about personal papers, books and records. I don't know where Mr. Moyes kept those things. I didn't need to know."
"No, of course not." Lawrence smiled encouragingly as George Needham's voice rose. "What happened next?"
"Mr. Moyes returned," he said, picking at a hangnail on his thumb. "He recognized Miller and greeted him warmly like a friend. He said that Miller was an old lodger of his and could stay if he wished."
"He had no home to go to?"
"I don't know. I don't know anything about Miller. And I had gone downstairs to the passageway where they were talking. When I returned, Mr. Moyes asked me to make up the bed in the best room for Miller to sleep in the following night. And he would have to make do with the sofa that night."
"He wasn't expected then?"
"No, Mr. Moyes would have told me. He shared his supper with Miller that evening, but he was always hospitable. He would have told me if he had known Miller was coming, so we could be sure there was enough food to go round."
"What did they talk about?"
"I don't know. I went upstairs to bed and rose again at 5 in the morning. It was still dark, so I lit a candle and made my way to the scullery in my nightclothes as usual. Miller was there."
George Needham closed his eyes and put his forehead on clasped hands. His body rocked involuntarily as the memories flooded back.
"Oh, that wicked man,"
he breathed. Lawrence waited for the boy to regain his composure.
"He was half-dressed,"
said Needham, lowering his hands,
"in a blue serge jacket and trousers. He hadn't yet put his boots on, and he had thrown his coat and hat upon a chair. I wished him good morning, and he looked at me with that odd twitch in his face and said, 'I can't waken the master.' and there is no coal to light the fire. So I showed him the coal hole and gave him a bucket and a hatchet for breaking the coal. Then I went back to my bedroom to finish dressing.
Where was Moyes?
In his room, I suppose. I never saw him again after supper the last evening.
And Miller?
He must have followed me,
George whispered, gazing into the distance.
I remember a puff of wind, and the candle went out. Then something struck me, and I fell to the floor. I must have passed out for a while, but I woke up and saw Miller coming out of the master's room with a poker in his hand. I pleaded for my life, but he raised it over his head and hit me again and again. I lay upon the floorboards, too injured to move. Then Miller stood over me as if trying to make his mind up whether to finish me off. He told me not to move or he would kill me, and I stayed as still and quiet as a body can be. Blood dripped into my eyes from my broken head, and I thought I would pass out at any moment and die there on the floor. But then I heard him go downstairs and the door slammed shut. I waited for a long time, then pulled myself downstairs and somehow stood up and staggered into the street. Cannot remember much more until I woke in the infirmary.
That's quite an ordeal, said Lawrence. I am sorry to dredge up such difficult memories.
The trial is in a few weeks, said Needham. I am due to give evidence. He must lose his freedom, and I must tell the court everything they need to know. It will not be easy.
Is that why you agreed to talk to me? Asked Lawrence. The boy nodded.
If I can talk to you, a stranger, then I can do my duty in court.
Will you answer one final question?
Yes.
Is there any doubt that Miller was your attacker?
Not the smallest, said George Needham. I could be mistaken about his voice or even about his appearance. But that twitch of his, that mannerism, it will stay with me until my dying day.
Chapter 10. Scole. Sunday, April 28th, 1895. Violet, how lovely to see you. It's been at least 4 days. Michael Farrow smiled as he took Violet's hand and helped her from the coach.
Thank you for coming to meet me,
she replied, reaching for her chatelaine bag, which had become detached from her belt during the journey. She clipped it back together and fastened the ribbon tight. Wait a minute, said Michael, approaching the driver. They talked for a few moments while Michael pointed to a waiting pony and trap. The driver dismounted and hauled Violet's carpet bag over to the cart, returned to his carriage and wiped his brow with a large red handkerchief. Would you like to stay at my lodgings tonight, Violet? The spare room is free today, but not tomorrow. I have spoken to George Panks at the Crown in Dis, and you can have a room there. Then you can get on with whatever brings you to Scole today.
Hopefully,
said Violet. Hopefully? Michael raised an eyebrow.
I need to speak to a man called Jackson, she said. But there has been no time to find out whether or not he is at home. I know nothing about him save for an address in Scole Street.
It's nearby, said Michael. We can walk. What do you want with Jackson?
I'm not altogether sure.
That sounds like something Lawrence would say.
Or something that he would ask someone else to do.
Ah, it's like that. Are you here under sufferance?
Violet sighed. Yes and no. On the one hand, Lawrence has gone to Liverpool on a whim, as you know. Another case that isn't a case, masquerading as a visit to his uncle.
His uncle is in Liverpool.
I know. I have met Frederick, but you know very well that he left prematurely when we happened upon a murder that supposedly needs his urgent attention.
And you have agreed to help him?
Only because I get to visit you, she said, and because I have quite a soft spot for Dis. One of my aunts lived here, and we often visited, just as well as the others live in Cornwall.
Dreadful journey, said Michael. Best avoided.
I have always thought so. But there is another reason why I wanted to humour Lawrence. Something odd has occurred, and it has upset him greatly.
What?
A print of Catherine's family coat of arms turned up in an envelope at our office. I opened it, and there was nothing inside except the crest. No note.
Oh dear, poor Lawrence. That must have hit him hard.
It has. And it's nearly Mayday.
Michael was about to respond when a sign above a shop on the street ahead caught his eye. "You were in luck," he said, pointing to the wooden banner over the shop front. "William Jackson Coal and Grocery Supplies." The door was ajar, propped open by a sack of flour. Michael and Violet negotiated their way around it and entered the establishment. The grocer's shop was in a large, airy room fronting the road and appeared to form a substantial part of the ground floor of the property. The neatly organized shop was well furnished. Rows of symmetrical shelving ran from floor to ceiling on the back walls, and a small counter ran along the middle of the room. There was an abundant stock of groceries, but no sign of the proprietor. "Perhaps he's through there," Michael suggested, pointing to a thick wooden door with an iron lock and bolt. "You can try it," said Violet doubtfully. "It looks as though it's locked." But it wasn't. The door opened into a walled garden planted with a surprising array of brightly coloured spring flowers. 2 large vegetable beds contained the first signs of young plant growth. A crash of metal against stone disturbed the tranquillity and drew their attention to a further area behind a trellis leading to a large yard. Sacks of coal and wooden pallets occupied one side, and a woman dressed in black knelt upon the floor. "Allow me," said Michael, squatting beside her as he collected a set of cast-iron shelf brackets from the yard floor. "Do excuse me," said the woman, standing up and brushing her dress. "I was trying to carry too much. Thank you for your help. Now, what can I do for you? Groceries or coal?" "I rather fancy some tinned peaches and custard for my supper tonight," said Michael. "Come this way, then," replied the woman as she led them back into the shop front. She grabbed the tin and gestured towards an upper shelf. "Birds or greens?" she asked. "Either," said Michael, reaching into his pocket for coins. "Where is Mr. Jackson today?" asked Violet. "William, or my husband, is in Dis." She looked towards the clock by the door. "Or perhaps he is on his way back by now. He didn't intend to stay long. Can I help?" "That depends whether you know anything about the Scole confession," said Violet. The woman regarded Violet quizzically. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by that." Violet sighed. "I thought that might be the case. I'm not sure whether Mr. Jackson will know any better, but I would like to ask him all the same." The woman put her elbow on the counter and rested her chin on her hand, peering at Violet with curiosity. "Is it important?" "It might be," said Violet. "It could pertain to a man called Edward Moyes." The woman gasped and covered her mouth. Her eyes were wide with shock, and she spoke with a trembling voice. "Edward was my brother. Amelia Jackson is my married name. I was Amelia Moyes before I wed. What has this confession got to do with Edward?" "I'm so sorry to have upset you," said Violet. "The truth is that I don't know. I'm a private investigator, and my partner is helping the Liverpool police with their investigation into your brother's death. Lawrence contacted me yesterday and asked if I could find out about a confession mentioned in Edward's journal." Violet reached into her bag and extracted a sheaf of papers. She selected a telegram and passed it over the counter to Mrs. Jackson. "Here. Ask about Edward Moyes and the Scole confession." Amelia mouthed the words as she read the telegram. "Oh, I see. Oh, dear. How difficult." "I'm sure it must be a dreadful time," said Michael, misunderstanding her meaning. "No, not that. It is upsetting, of course, but the greater problem is William. He is due back at any moment and will not brook any mention of Edward's name under his roof." "Why? Edward is your brother," said Violet, offering what she hoped was a safe level of sympathy. "Was my brother," said Amelia sadly. "Our family parted on bad terms, yet we lived in harmony to start with." "As children?" asked Michael. "Of course, but more recently than that. Edward lodged with us when he returned from New Zealand. He was a missionary," she said. "A godly man. He travelled to the other end of the world, bringing salvation to all who would listen."
Her eyes shone with pride. "That is a long way to go," said Violet. "Yes. My brother was away from our shores for almost 2 decades, said Amelia, "from Hobart in Tasmania to Christchurch in New Zealand, and many other places besides. His passion for the Lord's work was all that mattered to him. He suffered illness and scorn, but nothing could dissuade him from evangelizing. That it should come to this." She shook her head. "Yet your husband disliked Edward?" asked Violet gently. "Not always. There was a time when Edward and William got on well. One moment they were friendly, and the next William said he must leave. It was sudden and unexpected." "What precipitated the announcement from your husband?" "It was either the stranger or—" She stuttered, tripping over her words, then recovered her composure. "The incident." "What incident?" "It doesn't matter. The police have caught Edward's killer, and there is nothing to gain." "Perhaps," said Violet uncertainly. She was going to have to think on her feet. Lawrence had given her no useful information with which to work. "They have caught the murderer," she repeated, "but they need more information to secure a conviction when he goes to trial." She crossed her fingers behind her back, hating herself for the lie. Amelia accepted her story without further questioning. "If you think it will help, I will tell you. Sit down, but we must be quick. If William returns, you must leave immediately." "We will," said Violet. "I promise." Amelia Jackson cleared her throat. "2 things occurred in quick succession. I think the man came first, but it all happened within a week and could have been the other way around." "Go on," said Violet. "One morning in January I was in the parlour and William was writing out the ledger beside me. There was a knock at the door and I opened it to find a stranger on the doorstep. He was about my age, with white hair and skin the colour of burnt ochre, weathered and tanned." "A foreigner?" asked Michael. "I don't believe so," said Amelia, squinting as she recalled the scene. "He might have been English, though his accent sounded Australian. Edward's accent had changed during his time abroad, and the man spoke similarly. He did not strike me as having been born with dark skin. It must have come from spending a long time in the sun. Anyway, he knocked on the door and asked if Edward was available. I said that he wasn't, and the stranger said that suited him because he had a private matter to discuss with the man of the house. I showed him into the parlour and left him talking with William. 10 minutes later, my husband showed him to the door and came into the kitchen with a face like thunder." "Did he say why?" "No. William said that Edward was not welcome in his house, and he would be asking him to move out at once. I pleaded with him not to be so unkind. Edward had nowhere to go, and few friends due to his time abroad. But William was adamant that he must leave." "Did he put him out?" "He gave him a fortnight to pack his things and find another place to stay. But events took a different turn, and the situation worsened." "How?" "A policeman turned up at our house accompanied by a shopkeeper from Norwich, a certain Mr. Roy from Messrs. Bunting and Co. I don't know if you have heard of them, but they are drapers on St. Stephen's Corner. I have often used them. Their goods are of excellent quality." "I'm sure," said Violet. "Well, Police Constable Slaughter insisted on inspecting the contents of my house." "Whatever for?" "You might well ask," said Amelia Jackson, standing with her hands on her hips. She bristled with indignation, even though the encounter had been several years before. "The very thought of it," she continued. "Well, of course, William said no, but the constable said it was not a request. William must stand back and allow him to get on with it, or he would make more than one arrest that day." "Did he want to check the entire house?" "Not at first. The constable asked where Edward slept, and we showed him to the room. He looked and found nothing, then decided to search the shop instead. He opened a cupboard under the counter and pulled out 2 rugs and a coloured tablecloth that I had never seen before. Mr. Roy examined them and said they were the stolen items. William was furious and accused Roy of putting the items in the cupboard. I thought they might come to blows, but at that moment Edward returned. As soon as he saw the constable, he burst into tears and admitted the offence. He said that he stole the rugs from Bunting and Co. in full view of the shop assistants. It was not the first time. He said he had stolen flannel cloth and some boots on a prior occasion. Did he want for money? No. If Edward needed money, he had only to ask. It must have been a terrible shock, said Violet gently. It was. Emilia's eyes welled up at the memory. A tear slid down her cheek and she wiped it away. Edward was older than me, and I'd always looked up to him. He was honest and good. I cannot imagine what drove him to it. Did he ever tell you? He refused to discuss it, not with me anyway. What happened to him? The magistrates treated him well. Reverend Savory appealed for clemency. He visited the magistrates and told them about Edward's work in the colonies. They viewed his case with compassion, but he still went to jail and endured 2 months of hard labour. Could he have been unwell? It is not unknown for behaviour to change during sickness. Emilia nodded. It must have been something of that nature. Edward was a changed man when he returned to Norfolk. He suffered severe sunstroke in the outback, and it damaged his constitution and altered his mind. He suffered an enduring melancholy as if he was broken-hearted. He often said that he missed the Antipodes, but I think there was more to it. Why did he leave? That's another mystery. Emilia sighed. Edward said that he came back to England because he had no choice, but he would not say why. I am sorry, said Violet. He sounds like an honourable man. He was. I am glad that you don't think the worst of him, having heard the account of his trial. Now, I don't want to be rude, but William is due to return at any moment, and you must go. Of course, said Violet. Just one more question. How did your brother end up in Liverpool? It was due to the kindness of my cousin Albert, she replied. Albert is a bookseller in Liverpool. With nowhere to live and a reputation damaged beyond repair, it was clear that Edward must leave Norfolk. He set off for Liverpool to make a new life there and leave the shame and disgrace behind. He wrote to me, saying that he made a reasonable living from a bookstall and was happy. It suited him. How wicked of that man to take his life away when he'd finally found peace. God bless his soul, said Michael, who had stayed quietly in the background, and thank you for your time. He ushered Violet from the shop. What do you make of that? Asked Michael when they got outside. Violet was about to reply when she noticed a cart outside the front of the grocer's store. A man was walking away from it towards a fenced enclosure on the other side of the road. He carried a heavy sack over his shoulder which he heaved to the ground before slitting the top with a knife. He scooped the contents into a trough and leaned over the fence, watching something on the other side. That will be Jackson, whispered Violet. He's not going to want to discuss anything. No, Michael agreed. It's bound to be tricky. Stand still, said Violet, opening her bag and removing a retractable silver pencil. She rummaged inside and located a cream-coloured envelope, which she placed against Michael's back. What are you doing? I'm writing a note to Edward Moyes. Why? You will see. She slipped one of the telegrams into the envelope and tucked the flap inside, having first addressed it to Mr. Moyes of Scole Street, Dis. Turning to Michael, she took a deep breath. Come on, then. Chapter 11. No Love Lost. William Jackson stared at the chickens in the enclosure, oblivious to Violet's approach. He watched the birds vacantly as if he was not really looking at all. Michael and Violet loitered for a moment. Then Michael coughed and Jackson turned around. Mr. Jackson? Asked Violet. Yes? What do you want? I'm here to deliver a letter, she continued, with instructions to bring it by hand. It is for your lodger. I don't have a lodger. Oh. Violet looked crestfallen. Here, she said, thrusting the letter under his nose. Mr. Moyes, Scole Street. Jackson scanned the note, then passed it back. Moyes is dead, he said curtly. You'd better return the note to whoever sent it. Oh dear, said Violet. My friend wanted to ask him a question, a matter of some importance. Mr. Moyes had alluded to it, but never explained.
That won't be possible.
Perhaps you can help, she asked. Jackson closed his eyes and gritted his teeth. He looked Violet full in the face before moving towards her. She tried not to react as she felt the warmth of his breath against her cheek.
I have nothing to say about that filthy sinner, he growled. The man was a disgrace.
Violet tried to mask her surprise. I thought he was a man of God, she said.
So did I. But he deceived us all.
Violet considered eliciting more detail, but thought better of it and changed tack.
My friend was going to ask him about a confession, she said. The Scole confession.
William Jackson stared mutely for a moment, as if torn between helping or sending her packing with a flea in her ear. He chose the former.
The confession was nonsense, he said. Moyes was deluded. Had he not been part of the temperance movement, I would have thought him under the influence of alcohol when he wrote the letter.
What did he tell you?
Asked Violet.
None of your business, Jackson replied. What's it to you, anyway?
Nothing. I'm helping out a friend. This is rather awkward. He would prefer to ask you himself, but unfortunately it falls to me.
What Violet is trying to say, said Michael, stepping in, is that the presence of this confession is complicating your brother-in-law's murder investigation. But you imply that their interest is unnecessary.
Indeed.
William Jackson softened.
Edward Moyes was not right in the head. His exposure to constant sunshine and godless heathens affected his sanity. I cannot imagine why he thought I would be sympathetic to his fancies. He would have received a better reception had he sent the letter to my wife. For reasons best known to himself, he chose to waste my time. Now, tell me what you want to know and be quick about it.
Thank you.
Violet smiled at Michael, grateful for the intervention, then turned to William Jackson.
What exactly was in the confession?
I cannot remember, said Jackson. Moyes was vague in his language and sent a rambling letter expressing concern about a dead woman's Bible. He found it in a box of second-hand books purchased from Henry Garrard at the auction house in Dis, days before he left for Liverpool. I expect he intended to sell them. He took the books away, and later, while sorting through the box, he found a Bible that he recognized.
How?
Because there was an inscription inside, written in his hand.
Who did the Bible belong to?
Asked Violet.
A woman he'd encountered while preaching, which was hardly remarkable. He continued evangelizing on his return to England, and many, especially those who knew him, were sympathetic to his cause. According to the letter, this woman was memorable due to her burden of guilt. He'd prayed with her and given her a Bible upon which she had subsequently written a confession. He expected me to believe that in defiance of reasonable coincidence, he had found it again in the box.
You don't believe him?
I doubt it is an outright lie. There is likely an element of truth in this half-baked story, but not much of one.
What did the confession say?
Violet's eyes were wide with anticipation.
Moyes did not go into detail. He said that it was a serious matter and had begun with the murder of Fanny Nunn.
Fanny Nunn? I was about to ask if you knew the name. Who is she?
She died, said Jackson. But it was almost 20 years ago. So how this has any bearing today, I do not know.
How did she die?
She drowned in the mere.
Was it an accident?
I don't wish to discuss it further. It is irrelevant. The alleged confession is fanciful. I do not believe there was anything to it. More likely, Moyes was trying to use it in an attempt to inveigle himself back into my favour.
Did he name the woman?
No, he did not, which is another reason why I suspect much of this is a product of his imagination.
Do you still have the letter?
Violet asked, hopefully.
No.
Jackson snorted.
It was a source of irritation. If memory serves me correctly, I screwed it up and threw it into the crates. It'll be long gone by now, and good riddance to it. Now, have you finished?"
Violet, unable to think of anything else to ask, thanked him and turned to leave. "Lawrence has struck gold again," said Michael when they were out of earshot. Violet sighed. "Perhaps," she said. "Though it does sound like Moyse was a man with an overactive imagination, and I cannot see how this confession connects to his tragic end. Yet the note refers to a death, and Fanny Nunn drowned. It was likely an accident and nothing untoward. But Jackson didn't answer your question. It would have been much easier to confirm that she came to a natural end. It is curious," said Violet. "But I will ask Lawrence what he thinks. Is there a post office nearby? I will telegraph him first thing tomorrow morning." Michael nodded. "I'll show you where it is on the way back to my lodgings. Peaches and custard for supper," he said, shaking the can. Chapter 12. Dear Amy. January 1895. Dear Amy, I wonder if you ever understood the thrill of drowning. It's a beguiling sensation, sparking the senses alive, the splutter and gurgle of a dying breath, the splash of water during the fight for life, a sudden silence, all blend into an exquisite and sensual symphony. The sound of drowning resonates bone deep, cocoons and soothes the soul, evoking all senses. It is intense and satisfying. The first time I took a boy's life, I was unaware of the pleasure it would bring. How could I know without trying? How could anybody? The second time I set off with purpose to persuade, not threaten, hoping to resolve a conflict without violence. I met my aggressor with the best of intentions, but an opportunity arose, and a split-second reaction changed the course of my destiny. I killed him, and though some questioned the manner of his death, I was never suspected. There were no consequences, and the matter rested. An insignificant life snuffed out early, with memories petering away so quickly that he might never have existed at all. But today brings a problem, Amy. My luck may have finally run out. You, of all people, know that the Crown Hotel is a focal point in Dis. People come and people go all day long. Everyone passes through the doors sooner or later. They come for a drink, a chat, or a meeting, or to make a delivery, as happened today. But here am I claiming my luck has run out, when of course it cannot have. If so, I wouldn't have seen the letter. Somebody else would have picked it up. Though it lacks enough information to give me away, it could lead back to Moyse, and his account could lead to far worse. No, luck was with me. Fate placed me in the right place at the right time to protect my interests, and protect them I will. I was thinking of you earlier today when standing at the counter drinking with my companions. Your demise has not entirely removed you from my memory, and from time to time I recall our haunts. Anyway, Jackson's delivery boy turned up and hauled a crate through the passageway where he unknowingly deposited a ball of paper in his wake. I picked it up, intending to hand it back, but he walked on ahead and I unfurled the note. Imagine my horror as I read the second paragraph. Find out about Fanny Nunn. I knew she would return to haunt me one day, greedy little piglet that she was. Plump, homely Fanny Nunn and her meddling ways. The note gave me quite a start, and I hastened into the street to calm myself down. I found a quiet alleyway and reread the letter, identifying by the end of it 2 significant problems. Do you recall a man called Moyse?
Well, Amy dear, he is the writer of the note. Moyes, you will remember, is a bearded preacher, always trying and usually failing to convert the gullible to godliness. I never understood his motivation. Why would anyone waste their life persuading men into actions contrary to their selfish nature? He is an interfering busybody, and though I have always believed him harmless, this is no longer the case. The second problem is the note. It refers to a confession that Moyes possesses of which you are aware. It has the potential to threaten my comfortable life. Somebody, possibly Jackson, crumpled it into a ball and discarded it. The act suggests a disregard for Moyes's claims and implies that time is on my side. Anyone who knows Jackson also knows that he has argued with his brother-in-law, hardly surprising after the shame the prison sentence brought upon the family. There was a great deal of sympathy within Dis for the Antipodean felon, but not from me, and most definitely not from Jackson. I have even less sympathy now. Jackson may have discarded the note, but further interference from Moyes might yet draw unwanted attention. It is a pity, as things are going rather well. Business is good, and so the Moyes problem must be addressed. But the thought of confronting a full-grown, able-bodied man does not appeal. It is not my way. The note provides a contact address at 26 Red Cross Street in Liverpool. I am going there now, Amy, as soon as possible. I have some clearing up to do. Chapter 13. More telegrams. Monday, April 29th, 1895, 9:05 a.m. From Smith, Bungay Road, Scole, to Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool. Met Jackson. He thinks Moyes irrational and doubts credibility of confession. Fanny Nunn drowned 20 years ago. When will you be back? Monday, April 29th, 1895, 9:36 a.m. From Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool, to Smith, Bungay Road, Scole. Re Jackson. Why? Re Nunn. How? Not yet. Will seek interview with Miller first. Who wrote confession? Monday, April 29th, 1895, 10:16 a.m. From Smith, Bungay Road, Scole, to Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool. No love lost between Moyes and Jackson. Imprisonment probable cause of resentment, also presence of stranger. No details re Nunn drowning. Proceeding to Crown Hotel Dis shortly. I do not know. Monday, April 29th, 1895, 10:49 a.m. From Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool, to Smith, Bungay Road, Scole. What stranger? Find out circumstances of drowning. Reconfession. Find parish register and note female deaths for last decade. Who was imprisoned? Monday, April 29th, 1895, 1:17 p.m. From Smith, Bungay Road, Scole, to Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool. Seeing Michael later. Will search parish records tomorrow, then return to Bury. No more details by telegram. Come back soonest. Monday, April 29th, 1895, 2:50 p.m. From Harpham, Lord Street, Liverpool, to Smith, Crown Hotel, Dis. Dash it all, Violet. Give details of imprisonment. Cannot work without facts. Back when finished. Chapter 14. The Haven of Success. Can I help you? Violet had arrived at the Crown Hotel and was standing in the foyer admiring a painting of a windmill. An attractive young woman popped her head up from beneath the counter where she had been cleaning. "Oh, you startled me," said Violet, clutching her chest. "I was somewhere in that scene," she explained, gesturing towards the picture. "Lovely, isn't it?" said the girl. "Father bought it from the auction house only last month, and everybody seems pleased with it. It cheers the place up, don't you think? much more than the item in the cabinet below. Violet moved her hand across the glass-topped cupboard and peered at the rifle inside. The highly polished wooden gun bore the inscription, H. Holland. "It's a paradox," said the girl. "My father's pride and joy." "Paradox? It fires both shot and solid projectile, but don't ask Father about it unless you have a lot of free time." Violet nodded and moved closer to the counter. "I have reserved a room," she said. The girl turned a page in the hotel register. "Name?" she asked. "Violet Smith." "Yes, here it is. How many nights are you staying?" "I'm not sure yet," said Violet. "1, possibly 2. Have you eaten yet?" asked the girl. "Not since breakfast, and I'm famished." Violet had struggled to sleep in Michael's unfamiliar lodgings and had risen early, breakfasting before 7 o'clock. Between the journey and sending Lawrence's telegrams, she hadn't found time for lunch. "Would you like an evening meal? We've got mutton pie on the menu tonight. It's my favourite dish." Violet's stomach rumbled in anticipation. "Yes, dinner would be lovely. Here's your key. You're in room number 5 on the first floor. I will make your table up for 6 o'clock. Oh, and there's a telegram for you." Violet raised her eyes heavenwards as she took the telegram and noted the sender. She tucked it into her pocket and climbed the staircase to the first floor of the building. Room number 5 was on the right-hand side of the corridor at the far end. She dropped her carpet-bag and inserted the heavy iron key into the lock. It turned, and she entered a small room containing a single bed, a narrow wardrobe, and a dressing table. Dark velvet curtains framed a square window overlooking St. Nicholas Street. Violet sat on the end of the bed, reached into her pocket, and withdrew the telegram. She slit it open and frowned. "No, I won't give you any more information by telegram, Lawrence," she said aloud. "It is too much." She put the telegram on the dressing table, unpacked her few possessions, and hung her spare dress in the wardrobe. Then she watched the busy street from the window for a few moments, yawned loudly, and lay on the bed for a short rest before dinner. Violet woke at 6:15, taking a few moments to remember where she was and what she ought to be doing. She freshened up and bolted downstairs, arriving in the dining room just before 6:30. Violet located a small table in the corner of the room. She was barely seated when a young woman clad in a black dress and white apron arrived carrying a notebook and a pencil. "Dinner or cold cuts?" she asked. "Dinner, please," said Violet. "You can have beef stew or mutton pie, with treacle tart or rice pudding to follow," said the girl. Violet made her selection, and the waitress licked her pencil and scribbled on the notepad in a spidery hand. "I won't be long," she said cheerily, looking over her shoulder as she bustled towards the kitchen. Violet picked up her book and opened it at the page marked with a red ribbon. She was just getting lost in the story again when a buzz of noise preceded a procession of colourfully dressed men. They were walking past the dining room on their way to their meeting next door. Violet tried not to stare at their insignia and brightly coloured sashes and aprons. One man, who seemed to be the leader, wore a bright blue sash and a chain around his collar. The others sported silk tassels in shades of red and yellow, which hung from double-curved flaps on their white aprons bearing an open hand atop a golden ball. The rumble of noise dissipated from the corridor and passed into the next room as the men walked by. Violet tried to resume her reading, but the noise was so loud that it disturbed her concentration. Violet's chair was immediately next to the adjoining room, and the monotonous tones of what sounded like a treasurer's report rumbled through the wall. She debated moving tables, but closed her book with a sigh and waited for dinner to arrive. The waitress was as good as her word and delivered Violet's mutton pie quickly. "Noisy lot, aren't they?" she said, placing the hot plate on the tablecloth. "Freemasons, I suppose?" asked Violet, thinking of Francis and his regalia. "Odd fellows," said the waitress. "It's different." "Oh, I've heard the name Oddfellows recently," said Violet. "I think there is a lodge in Bury St. Edmunds." "There are lodges everywhere," said the waitress. "We have 2 in Diss, the Loyal Nelson Lodge and this one." She waved her hands towards the wall. "These gentlemen are members of the Loyal Haven of Success." "I love the unusual names. What do they do?" "They are a friendly society, miss. They look after each other." "A charitable organisation?" "Yes, that too. But the Oddfellows see each other right when times are hard or when someone dies." "Oh, I see, like a burial club." "Yes, miss. Similar to the Freemasons. Lots of secrecy and strange ceremonies, so I hear. Have you met my father, Mr. Panks?" "Not yet. He's a Mason," she said, crossing her arms and nodding her head as if to make a point. "But not an Oddfellow. No, anyway, eat your dinner, miss, before it goes cold." The mutton pie was every bit as good as Minnie had said. Violet was full and sleepy by the time she'd devoured the treacle tart, but had arranged to meet Michael after dinner and waited for him in the lounge. The room was empty when Violet arrived, and she tried to read again before another interruption stopped her. It was not to be. A heavy-set man bowled into the room, panting with exertion. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his brow, and placed a large leather satchel onto the table. It knocked against an ashtray, which clattered to the floor. "Oh, damn and blast it," said the man, not appearing to notice Violet, who was sitting quietly by the window. He pulled out a fob watch, checked the time, and tutted loudly. Violet gave a gentle cough, hoping to head off another outburst, and he looked up with a start. Sorry, I didn't see you there. What must you think of me?" Violet smiled. "Please don't worry." Bad language," he said, collapsing onto the chair, "is unforgivable, especially in front of a lady." "Well, I do forgive you," she said, "so there is nothing to worry about." He peered at his watch again. "There is," he said. "I'm late, very late. Now, where is it?" He rifled through the bag and pulled out a shiny medallion on a blue silk fob. "There's my beauty," he said, holding it aloft. "What is it?" "A members' jewel for the Oddfellows East Anglia Unity. There is a presentation here tonight," he said, closing the bag and depositing it in the corner of the room. "And Muggins here forgot to bring the most important thing. I've run a mile and back again to fetch it." "They were still making speeches when I came in here a few moments ago," said Violet. "You should have plenty of time." "Yes, good." He gave his florid complexion one more wipe with the handkerchief, put 2 fingers to his head in an informal salute, and left the room. Violet smiled. The man must have been in his early 50s, too young to be senile, but undoubtedly eccentric. His manner was endearing, and his membership of an organisation that went by the name of the Oddfellows entirely befitted his character. She finally managed to finish a chapter of her book before Michael arrived. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "The Reverend John has taken ill. Some unexpected paperwork to finish." "It's no trouble," said Violet. "I've had quite an entertaining evening so far." "You must tell me about it," said Michael. "But first I need a drink. Would you like one?" Michael's return from the bar coincided with the mass exodus of the Oddfellows from the second dining room. By the time he joined her, the lounge was full, and he could barely see her through the crowd of brightly dressed men. With typical foresight, Violet had placed her book on the adjoining seat, saving it for Michael. He squeezed through the throng and sat beside her. "Sorry," she said. "It will be hard to talk with all this noise. Perhaps we should find somewhere quieter." Michael was about to answer when a man approached them and thrust his hand out. "Reverend Farrow, how are you?" he boomed. "Very well, Harry. How's that young son of yours? Happy now his little horse has been returned. Sorry, Harry, where are my manners? Let me introduce you to Miss Smith. Violet is an old friend of mine. She is staying at the Crown tonight. Violet, this is Harry Aldrich, proprietor of the auction house and father of little William." Violet offered her hand. "And your little lad likes horses?" "What did you say?" Harry struggled to hear over the chatter in the small room. "Your little boy, does he like horses?" "A particular horse," said Harry with a twinkle. "A wooden one. He left it in the butcher's shop. Michael found it and asked around until he discovered who owned it. Then he returned it to my youngest." "How kind," said Violet. "It's noisy in here," said Harry, "and will get worse, no doubt." He nodded towards a group of men in the corner,
each clasping a jug of ale with a spare one set aside on the table. "We're sitting in a quieter area in the other room. Would you care to join us?" Michael looked towards Violet and raised an eyebrow. She nodded. "Thank you," he shouted towards Harry. They rose and followed Harry Aldrich into the second, more substantial dining room, where 3 men sat around a square table near an open door leading to the rear yard. An elderly collie dog snuffled beside one of the men, who Violet recognized from earlier.
"Ah," he said, "my nemesis returns to haunt me over my careless words."
"Not at all," she said.
"You met Joseph, then?" asked Harry. "Once met, never forgotten."
Joseph bowed his head with a satisfied smile.
"Miss Smith, Michael, this is George Fairweather. You've met Joseph, and you know Arthur, don't you?"
Michael offered his hand to the wiry, dark-haired man seated by the door, who returned the gesture. "Good to see you again," he said. "In happier circumstances. We were talking about Tom earlier." "Yes, poor chap. Violet, do you remember me mentioning the coachman with the ill wife when we were in Overstrand? Unfortunately, Tom's wife succumbed to the effects of consumption despite our prayers." "We will see him right," said Arthur. "He is one of us."
"The money won't heal his heart, brother," said Harry.
"But it will feed his children."
"There are not enough funds in the society to feed all yours, eh, George?"
quipped Joseph, lightening the mood.
"Do you have many children?"
asked Violet.
"Only 18,
said Joseph before George could reply. "That is a lot of mouths to feed."
"Arthur is halfway to catching me,"
George Fairweather growled as he gulped his pint. He was the only one at the table drinking alcohol. 9 and 1 on the way, said Arthur proudly. "I'll name him after you if it's a boy." George scowled.
"Don't bother."
"Or Grace for a girl." "That's pretty," said Violet. "Steady on," said Harry Aldrich as George knocked back the last of his pint.
"This obsession with temperance is making you boring,"
George replied, slamming the tankard onto the wooden tabletop. "And closer to God," said Harry. "Are you all in the Temperance League?" Violet asked. "I'm not," said Arthur, "but I don't drink at unity meetings out of respect." "It is not compulsory," said Harry. "Most of the men in the bar like a few drinks. I don't mind being around drinkers, although I don't indulge myself."
"He's a Methodist, you say?"
said Joseph, as if the two things went hand in hand. "Tell me about the Odd Fellows," said Violet. Michael grimaced. "That might not be possible," he said.
"We're not so secretive now," laughed Harry. "Once upon a time, a response to that question would be strictly forbidden. Some friendly societies were banned. The Oddfellows survived, but the movement was riven apart with factional splits and secessions. We're more modern now, and although we don't discuss our oaths and rituals outside the organization, we acknowledge their existence. And we have recently opened a ladies' lodge." Violet nodded approvingly. "What brings you to Dis?" asked Arthur Thompson. "I'm visiting Michael," she said. "You've come a long way to go to church,"
said Joseph, tickling the dog behind his ears. "But not to see a friend," said Violet. "Michael is not only a man of God. I have another purpose in Dis. I am looking for someone," she continued.
"Well, you've come to the right place," said Joseph. "We know everything about everyone. Harry's family have been here since Noah built the ark."
"Good," she said, "though the person I seek may be dead, so forgive me if my inquiries sound insensitive, and what I need to ask about happened a long time ago, so I am led to believe."
"What was that?"
"A woman called Fanny Nunn. I think she may have drowned. I wondered if it was by accident." The table fell silent. Only the soft pant of the dog was audible as the men glanced uneasily towards Violet. She bit her lip. "Sorry, have I spoken out of turn? Please forgive me." Harry Aldrich picked up his glass and sipped the water, then licked his lips as he considered his reply.
"You are right. It happened a long time ago, but Fanny's death has bothered me for many years. She did not die naturally. Somebody killed her, and I heard her drown. My father and we listened to those terrible screams as we tried to help her, but we couldn't save her. Even now, after all this time, her pitiful cries still haunt me.
Chapter 15. Inside Walton Jail. From the moment Lawrence decided to visit William Miller, he agonized over how he was going to access the jail. Neither Tom Strettle nor any of the other policemen were likely to help. Quite the contrary, and he couldn't go wandering in and expect a welcome. There were strict rules in place about visiting prisoners, and notorious inmates accused of murder were even more closely monitored. Lawrence considered arriving at the prison unannounced and bribing the guard. It wouldn't be the first time he had used that tactic, but it was fraught with risk. It wasn't until he returned to his uncle's house, having posted the third telegram to Violet, that an idea presented itself. It was a plausible plan, coming as the result of his uncle's latest obsession.
"What do you think of this, my boy?"
Uncle Frederick had asked as Lawrence entered the drawing room. Frederick was standing in front of a teak stand, holding the ugliest-looking black box that Lawrence had ever seen. "What is it?" he asked, staring at the glass lens set into a hole in the center of the box.
"It's a Kodak,"
said his uncle proudly. I'm still none the wiser.
"A camera, my boy, for taking photographs."
Lawrence examined the box doubtfully, noting a red string that dangled from a brass-colored fitting. The contraption looked more like a decorated bird box than a mechanism designed to produce an image.
"Stand there,"
said his uncle, directing Lawrence towards the window where Connie was posing in an evening gown.
"Now, squeeze together."
Lawrence complied, trying to produce a smile that did not look artificial and forced. Uncle Frederick pulled a string, then tripped a button on the left-hand side of the device. A mechanism inside emitted a gentle whir. "Can I see it?" asked Lawrence.
"You can pick it up if you like."
"Not the camera," said Lawrence. "I meant the picture."
"Oh, my dear boy, no. That is not how it works, not at all. Once the film is full, I send the box to Kodak. Then they print the photographs and return the camera. It's jolly clever."
"How long does it take?"
"That depends. This film has the capacity for 100 photographs. It will take a good few months to use them and another 3 weeks for processing."
"How many photographs do you take a week?" Lawrence asked.
"1 or 2.
"Then it will take most of the year before you see the fruits of your efforts. You will have forgotten what was on the film." Uncle Frederick pursed his lips.
"I expect that will be half the fun of it," he said.
"Don't you approve?" "It's not for me to have an opinion," said Lawrence, hoping he had not offended, "as long as you enjoy your photography."
"Look what it does,"
said his uncle, hobbling towards an armchair. He knelt, pushed his walking cane under one side of the chair and gave it a push. A large box emerged from the other side. Uncle Frederick retrieved it, opened the lid, and pulled out a clutch of black and white images which he passed to Lawrence. The round images were grainy, but a clear representation of Uncle Frederick and Lawrence's father. "When were these taken?" asked Lawrence, surprised. "I have never seen them."
"Back in 1888, when Lionel last visited. We had them done by a professional photographer. I was so impressed that I bought a camera myself."
"If these devices become readily available, photographers will go out of business," said Lawrence.
"I'm surprised you don't make use of a camera yourself, given your occupation."
"How could I? They're cumbersome and slow to operate."
"Not all. Hand-held cameras have been around for over a decade, and Stern's patent concealed vest camera is now available in England."
Lawrence considered the value of purchasing one. "I can see how it might be useful," he admitted. "It would have helped Violet with her cuckolded husband case. She got there in the end, but a photograph would have provided compelling evidence. I will give it further thought."
"Good,"
said his uncle, jovially patting Lawrence on the back.
"By all means, try the camera yourself if you wish. This model is too conspicuous to be useful to you, but it's fascinating to operate."
Lawrence decided to humor his uncle and took up a position behind the tripod. He lined up a few practice shots using the V-shape on the leather to frame his Uncle Frederick
and what would no doubt become his Aunt Connie. Once Lawrence was sure of his technique, he pulled the string and committed the moment to print. Turning a key on top of the box, Lawrence advanced the film as the germ of an idea formed in his head. Tuesday, April 30th, 1895. The hackney cab slowed to a halt outside Walton Jail. Lawrence emerged, carrying a tripod and a box containing the camera. He paid the bemused-looking cabman and walked towards the turreted jail. It was a handsome brick structure with stone dressings and round-headed windows, too grand to house the degenerate underbelly of Liverpool's criminal fraternity. Lawrence stopped for a moment to consider his options. There was no easy way to see William Miller, and subterfuge was his only choice. Even then, he would need to approach the deception with a bold disregard for the rules. Having racked his brain for a more simple option, Lawrence had ruled out everything else. All that remained was the course of action upon which he was about to embark. He would masquerade as a prison photographer. There were several reasons why he doubted the efficacy of this plan. Aside from the fact that there may already be a photographer, there was an equal chance of there never having been one. Some prisons routinely catalogued their offenders, but by no means all. Worse still, Lawrence might walk in to find an appointed photographer already at work in the jail. Either way, he would have to negotiate around this and any other problems that he might not have considered. It was essential to locate William Miller and find out how he had managed to conduct a burglary quite so unsuccessfully. Taking a deep breath, Lawrence walked towards the gate and past the low railings that surrounded the building. He strolled beyond the towers to a large wooden door and rang a brass bell conveniently placed to the side. Moments later, a square window opened, and the deep-voiced guard responded. "Yes." "I've come to photograph the prisoner Miller." "Which one?" "William Miller. He's not been here long." "I know the one," said the guard. "Shifty little weasel. But aren't they all? Wait a minute." Lawrence peered through the open hatch as the prison guard removed a sheet of carefully ruled paper from a clip on the wall. He lifted his glasses and squinted. "Nothing here," he said. "Didn't you come last week?" "Yes," said Lawrence gruffly. "This is a special request." "Who from?" "The chief constable to your governor," he said. "It's not on my list." "I can't help that. I've got my orders. Why don't you ask someone in authority?" Lawrence waited with bated breath, hoping that the guard did not have easy access to the prison warden. With a heavy camera and a cumbersome tripod, Lawrence was in no position to make a quick getaway should the need arise. "I can't," said the guard. "Just hand me the paperwork, will you?" Lawrence fished into his jacket for a note of authority from the police station, which he had forged earlier in the day. "Inspector Strettle," said the guard as he recognized the signature block. "Seems in order. I'll hang on to this." "As you wish," said Lawrence. The door swung open, and Lawrence passed through it and into an inner courtyard. The guard nodded to a pair of younger men who were playing cards on a trestle table outside the guardhouse. "One of you show him to D block." "I'll do it." The fair-haired warder tossed the cards onto the table and picked up a packet of woodbines and a box of matches. He led the way across the quadrangle in front of the entrance to the towered building dominating the prison complex. "This way," he said, turning left into a long corridor. They had almost reached the other end when he turned right at a double door and into a seating area beyond which was a barred door. "You can photograph him in there," said the guard, pointing to a large room on the left with a window facing into the courtyard. "I'll go and fetch him." Lawrence was too nervous to sit down and tried the door of the side room, hoping to see the view from the inner courtyard. The door would not budge, so he wandered towards a pinboard and read the few dog-eared notices. Lawrence raised an eyebrow at a flyer from the Primitive Methodists appealing for temperance, hoping they had aimed it at the guards. Traditionally, prisoners lacked access to alcohol, but who knew what might come about from the constant prison reforms? His musings were soon interrupted by the arrival of the fair-haired guard and a man of about 5'6", with a thick brown moustache and chains around his wrists, who accompanied him. At about 30 years old, William Miller was younger than Lawrence had anticipated. The guard stepped forward, unlocked the side room, and ushered Lawrence through. "Set up over there," he commanded before retreating to the next room, where he stood quietly next to the prisoner. Lawrence opened the tripod and attached the camera, hoping that he looked authentic. The Kodak remained steady on the stand, which came as something of a relief. He raised a hand to the guard, who nodded before pushing the prisoner through the door. Then he selected a key from a large chain around his waist and unlocked the fetters. Miller rubbed his wrists and jerked his head while his eye twitched uncontrollably. "I'll be outside having a cigarette," said the warden, closing the door. Lawrence watched the guard loiter next to a low window running the length of the side room. He lit a cigarette and stared at Lawrence intently. Lawrence stood behind the camera, and as soon as it was clear that the guard was out of earshot, began to speak. "I've been to Red Cross Street," he said. "You left a mess." Miller stared at him, and the corner of his mouth began to twitch in time with his right eye. "People I know, influential people, think you may be innocent." Lawrence lied. "How would they know?" growled Miller. "Are you?" asked Lawrence, pulling the red cord on the Kodak. "What's it to you?" "There isn't much time," said Lawrence. "If you are innocent, I can help." "And if I'm not?" Lawrence pressed the button, which, in the hands of an expert, would produce an image. Nobody would see the finished article, so he only needed to look the part. The guard continued to smoke, and he assumed that the ruse was working. "Then I can't do very much. Now, what were you looking for?" "Where?" "In the attic of Red Cross Street." "How do you know?" Miller stepped backwards in surprise. "Never mind that. You missed every valuable item in the property. Nobody is that careless." "I've got nothing to say." "Fine. But have you got a good memory?" Miller nodded. "My name is Harpham. Lawrence Harpham. My offices are at the Butter Market in Bury St. Edmunds. I'm a private investigator, and I will try to help you." "I don't need your help," hissed Miller. The guard tossed his cigarette to the floor, stubbed it out, retrieved it, then dropped it in a waste bin. He glared at Lawrence suspiciously and entered the room. "Finished?" "All done," said Lawrence. The guard repositioned Miller and locked his shackles. "Oi, Jessup!" he bellowed to a man further down the corridor. "Show him out, will you?" he asked, pointing to Lawrence. Then, without another word, he unlocked the barred gate and marched Miller back to his cell. Minutes later, Lawrence emerged into the sunlight, wondering whether the experience had been worth it. He had gained no further information from Miller, and, had he been a cat, would be several lives lighter. It might have been worthwhile had Lawrence felt a strong leaning towards Miller's guilt or innocence. Instead, he was ambivalent. His instinct had deserted him. Lawrence hailed a cab conveniently parked down Hornby Road. He would return the camera to his uncle and board the next train to Bury. Chapter 16. Message from the Past. It was 7:15 in the evening when Lawrence finally opened the doors of 33 Butter Market. He settled at his desk feeling tired and irritable, recalling unpleasant memories of his train journey home. Lawrence had chosen an empty carriage and was reading a book when two innocent-looking children had invaded his space. At first he was untroubled and eyed them with benign amusement. But as the journey progressed, they started asking a series of increasingly inane questions, and his patience began to falter. He tolerated them until the younger boy started asking why cows slept standing up. Lawrence said he did not know. The boy tried again, and Lawrence gave the same answer. Finally, the boy dissolved in tears and kicked Lawrence on the leg. Lawrence scowled at the mother, waiting for her intervention, but her eyes remained shut. He spent the rest of the journey acting as an unpaid babysitter, glowering resentfully and convinced that she was feigning sleep. Lawrence had arrived in Bury after what seemed like an eternity. He deposited his luggage at home without bothering to unpack and proceeded to his office. It was clean and tidy as usual, and he was glad that he had listened to Violet when she insisted on employing a cleaner. Though initially reluctant, it had turned out to be a wise decision. Annie Hutchinson was hard-working and intelligent. Adept at dealing with general inquiries as well as cleaning, she was a safe pair of hands and more than capable of minding the office in their absence. But Lawrence suspected there was trouble ahead with the recent arrival of a young admirer, and his sister had introduced her to a young man, Robert Hicks. He had been hanging around far too often for Lawrence's liking. Not that he had anything against Robert, but because he lived in Norwich, he represented a threat. Lawrence had no wish for his reliable domestic to leave and settle elsewhere. The ever-efficient Annie had piled his post in the centre of the desk. 3 sealed letters rested on top of an open envelope, but only one of them held his interest. Lawrence had come to the office with the sole intention of locating the letter containing Catherine's crest. He'd asked Violet to destroy it, but knew very well that she wouldn't. Now that it was possible, he felt an overwhelming urge to procrastinate. He ignored the open envelope and turned to another, addressed in the familiar hand of his Uncle Max. It contained an invitation for a luncheon engagement, which Lawrence marked on the calendar. He filed the message in his bottom drawer, wondering why Uncle Max had chosen to post it to the office. Generally, mail found its way to his apartment unless it was business-related, but Uncle Max was getting on a bit. Perhaps it was a sign of things to come. Lawrence picked up the second envelope. It was brown and most likely contained a bill. Under normal circumstances, Lawrence would have put it straight on Violet's desk, unopened. But such was his need to postpone the inevitable that he opened it and read it, groaning aloud at the contents. The invoice was from the coal merchant who Lawrence should have paid 2 weeks ago. Violet had entrusted him with visiting the shop and settling the bill. He'd left with the best of intentions, but something had distracted him, though he could not remember what. In any case, Violet would be cross. He shoved the invoice into his jacket pocket, intending to settle it another day. Then Violet wouldn't need to know. Lawrence dealt with the third letter about a missing necklace, and the fourth about a poisoned guard dog by making appointments in his diary. He wasted even more time scribbling quick replies to each inquirer confirming his dates of attendance. Sighing, Lawrence rose and rested the letters against the carriage clock on the mantelpiece, ready for Annie to post tomorrow. Then he returned to his desk to confront the unavoidable. Any longer, and the problem would assume elephantine proportions. The cream-coloured envelope lurking on the desk was postmark-free and unstamped. Written at the top in capital letters was the word "Urgent," with the name and office address below. The rest of the envelope was unremarkable and contained no clues to the sender. Lawrence took a deep breath and removed the contents, keeping the picture face down, then steeled himself and turned it over. There it was. A perfect line and ink drawing of Catherine's crest, with Celtic crosses on a red stripe and blue dolphins on a silver background. He would recognize it anywhere. Penmanship was one of the quirks he'd loved about Catherine. She was proud of her heritage and a talented artist, regularly combining both through sketches of her coat of arms. This drawing was so close to her style that it could almost belong to her. Lawrence took a closer look. The similarity was uncanny. Who had sent it and why? Finding no other clues, Lawrence put his head in his hands and stared at the crest. He sat motionlessly for several minutes, then pushed his chair back and walked to the rear of the office. Unlatching the door, Lawrence approached the kitchen area shared with the milliner above and placed a pan on the gas stove. He watched the unlit hob for a few moments, his mind elsewhere.
Then, shaking his head, he rummaged in the drawer for a packet of matches and struck one. Wearing a look of grim determination, Lawrence returned to the office. He discarded the crest and collected the envelope in which it had arrived. Lawrence paced the floor of the narrow kitchen, waiting for the pan to boil. Before long, the water began to bubble, and when he judged it ready, he took the envelope and held it over the boiling water. After a few moments, Lawrence removed the envelope and placed it on a low wooden cabinet. He waited, considering the futility of his actions and a plan doomed to failure. The uncanny resemblance of the crest with Catherine's drawing style had provoked memories. Memories of their courtship and time spent apart when they whiled away the hours by writing to each other. It had started when Lawrence was on duty in the Isle of Man. After 3 weeks of boredom and countless letters, he'd decided to write a secret message on the envelope flap. Catherine had found it and responded in kind, and this continued whenever he went away. They'd kept it up until motherhood stripped away the romance and much of Catherine's time. Lawrence picked at the envelope flap, not expecting to find anything. Catherine was dead and nobody else knew about their little game, yet he felt compelled to check. The steam had softened the envelope, and the flap pulled apart with ease. There, beneath the fold, written in dark blue ink, was the word deceiver. Lawrence dropped the envelope, recoiling in horror. He stumbled into his office, sat down heavily at his desk, and pulled the bottom drawer open. Grasping the bottle inside, Lawrence fumbled for a glass, slamming it carelessly onto the table. It split in half, and he hurled it to the floor, splintering shards across the office. His eyes darted from the crest to the envelope. Deceiver, deceiver, deceiver. Never, never, never. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, and the silence in the office was deafening. He took a slug of whiskey straight from the bottle and kept on drinking until darkness fell around him.